Lyanna Stark stood on the battlements of Winterfell as a pale dawn broke over the frosted horizon. A hush lay across the courtyard below, though she could see the outline of a stable hand leading the great black mare toward the stables, and beyond that a handful of guards making their early rounds. She pressed her hands against the stone, felt the chill that seeped from it even in summer, and told herself she was grateful to be home. The memories of all that had happened were still raw, the vivid images of sword points gleaming in the dawn, the terrible cry that had torn the air when Rhaegar fell on the trident, the hush in the tower where she had nearly breathed her last. Now, she stood returned to the ancestral seat of her family, very much alive yet acutely aware of how fragile that life could be. Her hair, once braided with ribbons and dancing in the breeze, had been cut short for ease of travel some weeks ago. It now brushed her shoulders, left free to blow about her face whenever the winds came surging. She had scarcely recognized her reflection in the polished metal of a looking-glass the first time she dared glance at her changed visage. The bruises from childbirth had faded, the hollowness in her cheeks was less pronounced, yet her eyes carried a deep shadow that would not soon leave her. Some days, she asked herself if the woman in the reflection was the same girl who had once ridden horses with reckless abandon across the rolling hills, who had laughed in the face of danger. But time had passed, bringing war and heartbreak in its wake. And with it, she discovered another side of herself, a determination that burned with an intensity she had never known before. She felt a sudden flash of memory. The dust on the horizon, the shrieks of wounded men, the swirl of a crimson banner with a three-headed dragon. Though Robert Baratheon sat upon the Iron Throne now, though Ned had returned to Winterfell, though the rebellion had ended with Targaryen defeat, what had happened could not be erased. And what had been concealed within the walls of the Tower of Joy was a matter she held close to her heart. She remembered her plea to Ned, the trembling of her bloodied fingers against his, as she made him swear. Ned had told everyone that she had been gravely ill, that she needed time to recover, that it was best to let the realm assume she had perished. But Lyanna, never one to fade into quiet nothingness, had ultimately refused to remain hidden. The realm believed her dead, though a select few whispered rumors of her survival. She could not say whether living as a phantom or stepping into a life under the sun again was more daunting. In the end, the pull of home was too strong, and the thought of letting the truth remain veiled forever felt like letting her entire story vanish under dust. In the halls below she saw movement, a swirl of skirts perhaps, and realized it must be Catelyn Tully, wife. They had never been properly introduced before the war had begun, but now that the battles were behind them, Lyanna had found the Lady of Winterfell to be polite, often kind, but distantly uncertain of the Stark sister returned from the grave. Catelyn's courtesy never faltered. She gave gracious smiles and offered companionship when Lyanna tried to settle back into a routine. Yet Lyanna could sense that the lady harbored some unease. Rumors persisted that Rhaegar had stolen her away, that she had gone willingly, that she had been a victim, or that she had been the cause of all this bloodshed. And now she was here, quite alive. A living question that no one quite knew how to answer. Lyanna ran her hand along the edge of the stone, as if to reassure herself that something unchanging still existed. She gazed over the white-capped mountains in the distance, thinking about the legends of the kings of winter and the labyrinth of crypts below the castle. The north was steeped in ancient pride. It was said that the name Stark conjured images of winter wolves, unwavering loyalty, and a fierce commitment to honor. She wondered how she might uphold such a legacy. The ideas swirled in her mind, colliding with the recollection of voices telling her that if she had but stayed quiet, if she had not turned her head at a certain tilt, or responded to a certain invitation, war might never have come. She knew that was a lie. The seeds of war had been sown long before she ever danced with a prince at Harrenhal. But people needed someone to blame, needed a scapegoat. A part of her bristled at that, but she reminded herself that a reckless impulse had indeed played a role in her fate. She stepped away from the parapet, turning toward the stairwell that led down into the corridors. The clang of swords from the training yard floated up to her, and she paused to peer over the walkway. There, two young squires exchanged blows with wooden practice swords, their fervor reminiscent of how she once trained in secret with Ned or Benjen. A memory rose. Brandishing a sword shaped from a broken branch, imagining herself as some gallant knight. Women were not knights, the realm had always insisted. But Lyanna had never found it in her heart to quite believe that. Heading down the winding steps, she pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. Her hips and back still ached from recent events, though she managed to conceal most of her discomfort. She had confided a few words to Maester Lewin, who had done what he could to assist her, but the lingering pain was something she learned to endure in silence. Outside, a thin blanket of new-fallen snow crunched beneath her boots, even as the sky promised a gentle warmth later that day. The seasons shifted slowly in the north. As she emerged into the courtyard, a small flock of ravens took flight from the rookery tower. She watched them scatter into the pale sky, cawing into the silence. One bird settled on a ledge above her, tilting its head as if studying her. For a moment, she regarded it, remembering stories of how the children of the forest once wove their magic through ravens to see far and wide. It felt as though the bird were some watchful spirit, come to glean her secrets. She stared back until the raven fluttered away. Rob, Ned's son, was but a babe, rosy-cheeked and wide-eyed in his swaddling. Lyanna had seen him just once since her return, cradled in Catelyn's arms, sleeping quietly with a face as calm as the still waters of the nearby lake. Lyanna did not know how to approach her nephew, how to hold him without feeling a tumult of sorrow and envy and love all at once. She thought of the child she had borne, now shielded away. She thought of the name that had been whispered on her lips when she felt she might never draw breath again. An arrangement had been reached, a secret kept. And though it cost her greatly, Lyanna vowed to protect the child's identity at all costs. Even if that meant the boy would not call her mother. She stood there in the courtyard, straining to recall her younger days when she had roamed Winterfell with boundless energy. She had prowled the corridors, climbed the towers, forced her brothers to chase her down until all of them collapsed in fits of laughter. Now she felt the hush in these walls, the subdued acceptance of her presence. Winterfell was the same fortress she had always known. Yet it felt like a place of rebirth and mourning combined. A stable boy approached, doffing his cap, timidly asking if the Lady Stark needed a horse. She smiled, a small fleeting curve of her lips, and asked him to saddle a chestnut mare that she used to ride in her girlhood. The stable boy nodded enthusiastically, bowing away. She strolled in that direction, welcomed by the warm scents of hay and horseflesh. Within, the shadows flickered with torchlight, and she could hear the soft snorts and hoof scuffles of the beasts. There, in the third stall, was the chestnut mare that had once borne her across the icy fields. The horse recognized her, or so it seemed, letting out a gentle whinny. Lyanna ran a hand along the animal's neck, and the familiarity of that moment caused her throat to tighten. She led the mare outside, the stable boy following close behind with the tack. He helped secure the bridle and saddle, though she waved off his attempt to aid her mounting. With a slight effort, she lifted herself into the saddle, teeth pressing together as a jolt of pain shot through her side. It was not as easy as it once had been, but she refused to be deterred. With a nod of thanks, she urged the mare forward, trotting out of the courtyard toward the open gate. The guards stationed there gave her respectful inclines of their heads, though she sensed their curiosity. Her presence was becoming part of the daily routine, though it was still new enough to generate whispers. As she passed beyond the walls, she breathed a sigh of relief. The wide expanse of the north lay before her. Gently rolling plains of white, pockets of evergreen forests, and the air so cold and clear it stung her lungs. She let the mare set a leisurely pace, content to hear the crunch of hooves on snow-packed ground, to feel the quiet hush of the surroundings. A hawk soared overhead, scanning the fields for prey. The horizon glowed with the promise of the rising sun, and the landscape caught its weak rays like shards of ice glimmering in a distant firelight. For a time, she let her mind drift, remembering what it felt like to race across these expanses with reckless speed, how she would urge her horse to a gallop and leave all thought behind. Now caution tempered her impulses. She was not the same girl who had stolen away to Harrenhal, or leapt into a swirl of festivities, unafraid of the consequences. She found her way toward a narrow woodland path, where the pines grew tall and their boughs creaked in the wind. Birds fluttered amid the branches, occasionally letting out trills that broke the stillness. She recognized a cluster of stones that marked a shepherd's route. She recalled once finding a wounded lamb there. Years passed, and nursing it back to health. So many memories returned, washing over her like the gentle sigh of the cold breeze. She paused in a clearing, slid from the saddle, and let the mare nibble at a patch of winter grass that peeked through the snow. Kneeling, she scooped up a bit of snow, rubbing it between her palms as if to ground herself in the moment. She wondered how she could possibly move forward, how she might claim her place in this land she had once been desperate to protect. There, in the hush of the woods, she allowed herself to shed a single tear for the life she had left behind, and for the secrets that tethered her future. She wiped the tear away quickly and stood back straight. She was a Stark of Winterfell, and if her father had still been alive, he would have reminded her that a Stark does not yield. They endure. They brace against the fierce storms, and they stand resolute when the snows come. Perhaps, she thought, that was what this would be. An endurance. A promise to build a new life. To protect those under her care. Mounting again, she turned the mare back toward Winterfell. She longed for a quiet conversation with Ned. For some guidance from her kind, thoughtful older brother. Ever since her arrival, they had exchanged stiff greetings, the weight of unspoken truths pressing between them. He was Warden of the North, newly returned with a foreign wife, an infant son, and a realm still reeling from war. She knew Ned walked a tightrope between the demands of the crown and the needs of his people. Perhaps that accounted for the hesitation in his eyes whenever he looked at her. Or maybe it was the memory of how close he had come to losing her. She entered through the gates, dismounting in the courtyard, and handed the reins to the stable boy. Patting the mare's flank in thanks, she then made her way indoors. The warmth of the great hall greeted her, along with the savory smell of stewed meats and fresh bread. Servants bustled about, laying out bowls and platters for the morning meal. Lyanna took a seat at a long table near the hearth, ignoring the wary glances of some who still found her presence unsettling. The flickering flames across the stone hearth cast dancing shadows that reminded her of the heart tree in the godswood, with its solemn face carved into ancient bark. She had scarcely settled when Ned appeared. He looked weary, though his posture was upright, and his expression carefully measured. His gray eyes, set beneath the weight of recent burdens, found hers, and he approached quietly. She offered him a gentle, almost timid smile, but said nothing as he sank onto the bench across from her. He said her name as a greeting, low and soft, as though testing whether it truly belonged to the living. She nodded in acknowledgement and watched as the servant placed a steaming bowl of porridge before them both. Ned thanked the servant politely, and then his gaze returned to Lyanna. For a long moment, silence stretched. The only sounds were the distant chatter of a few men warming themselves at the far end of the hall. Finally, she spoke, voice hushed. "Do you remember the day we raced across the fields? You and Benjen and I. Brandon said we were all fools to run off like that in the middle of winter. But we did it anyway." She smiled faintly at the recollection. "I beat you both that day. My horse was swifter. Benjen claimed I cheated." Ned's lips curved a fraction, though sorrow lingered behind his eyes. I remember," he replied softly. "I also remember Brandon's wrath when we came back, soaked to the bone." She lowered her gaze to her bowl, stirring absently at the porridge. "Sometimes I wish we could go back to that time," she admitted. "Before everything changed, when we were just children with our entire lives in front of us." Ned let out a soft breath, reaching across the table to place a hand gently over hers. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything that happened, for what you had to go through, for not arriving sooner. I never wanted this for you." Then she looked at him, resisting the urge to let her emotions spill over. "It wasn't your fault," she said, her voice quavering only slightly. "You did what you could. You kept your promise." Ned's eyes hardened with an unspoken determination, and he pressed his lips together. "We must keep it still," he whispered. "No one can know the truth of what transpired, not if the child is to live in safety." Lyanna clenched her jaw. "I know," she said, "but that doesn't make it easier." He nodded solemnly. Another pause lingered before he changed the subject, deliberately, quietly. Caitlin has been asking me how best to address your presence to our bannermen. Some already suspect you're alive. Our uncle, Sir Roderick, many of the northern lords. I've heard the rumors. They want to see you, to confirm it for themselves. She swallowed, setting her spoon aside. Let them see me, she said. I'm done hiding. I can't live in the shadows, Ned. The words rang with a quiet resolve. Winterfell is my home too. A slight nod met her words. Yes, he conceded. Winterfell and the North are your home. You deserve your place here, but you must be prepared for what that means. You know they'll have questions, demands. Some might judge you harshly, blame you for the war, for the thousands lost. Nar. She lifted her chin, steel creeping into her gaze. Let them, she said. I can't change the past, but I will face them. I'll prove myself worthy of the Stark name, no matter what they think or say. Ned studied her, perhaps seeing a reflection of Brandon's fierce will in her set jaw, or maybe a hint of their father's quiet resolution. After a moment, he gave a single nod. Then I'll call a gathering of the bannermen within the month, he said. They will come to see me, to offer their respects after this tumultuous time, and they will see you at my side. Lyanna reached for his hand again, clasping it in a firm grip. Thank you, she said, voice husky. She might have said more, but the words were too tangled inside her. She lifted her bowl and took a sip of the lukewarm porridge, forcing herself to swallow. She would need her strength for the days ahead. When Ned left, she lingered by the hearth, letting the warmth soak into her bones. The hall had started to fill with a handful of guardsmen and a small group of local farmers invited in for the morning meal. She nodded politely to those who greeted her, noticing how some bowed their heads respectfully, while others lowered their gazes in something close to unease. She did not resent them. She understood that legends and rumors had grown around her, painting her as either a tragic heroine or a willful architect of war. It would take time to unravel those tales, if that was even possible. She stepped out into the corridor, intending to visit the Godswood, when she saw Caitlin approaching. The lady's auburn hair gleamed in the torchlight, and her face had the delicate, refined features of a river maiden. She curtsied just slightly when she saw Lyanna, a courteous gesture that Lyanna reciprocated with a small bow of her head. Good morning, Caitlin greeted, her voice calm and poised. My lord husband mentioned you would be staying here permanently. I wanted to let you know that we've prepared chambers for you near the Maester's Tower. Though if you have a preference for other quarters, please only say so. Yen? Lyanna mustered a polite smile. I appreciate your kindness. The rooms near the tower will do fine. She paused, feeling the need to offer some explanation or gratitude. Thank you, truly. I know this must be strange for you, having me return so suddenly. Caitlin's porcelain features did not shift, but Lyanna sensed the uncertainty simmering beneath. You are Ned's sister, she said with calm composure. Winterfell is your home, and I intend to make you feel welcome. If you need anything, do not hesitate to ask. The sincerity in her tone seemed genuine, and Lyanna felt a small pang of gratitude. Yet she could not shake the awareness that her presence here was a disruption. She watched Caitlin move past, graceful yet guarded, and Lyanna made her way outside once more. The sky had brightened considerably, pale sunlight shimmering off the frost. Tucking her cloak tighter around her shoulders, she walked toward the Godswood. The ancient sentinel trees and pines surrounded the weirwood, which stood at the center, its red leaves fluttering like silent watchers. The face carved into the trunk stared with solemn red eyes that seemed to look into the soul of any who dared approach. Lyanna inhaled the crisp, resinous scent of the pines, letting her footsteps fall softly on the mossy ground. She moved closer to the weirwood, remembering the time she had come here as a child, kneeling in the quiet to pray to the old gods, or to simply find peace when she was troubled. She settled on a stone beside the black pool, letting her gaze drift across the still surface that mirrored the reflection of the crimson leaves overhead. The hush of the Godswood enveloped her, a sanctuary from the clamor of rumor and politics. She stared at the carved face, recalling old tales of the children of the forest, who had cut these faces into weirwoods to watch over the realms of men. Her lips parted, and she whispered a small prayer for guidance, for strength, for the ability to protect what mattered most. Time slipped by without her awareness, until she heard quiet steps behind her. Turning, she saw Benjen approaching. He had grown into a man since she last truly beheld him, though he still possessed that youthful brightness in his eyes. The war had changed him too. He walked with a thoughtful hush, as if burdened by something that set him apart from the rest of the family. He inclined his head to her and paused at a respectful distance. "I wondered when I might see you here again," he said softly, glancing at the old god's tree. "I've come often to think on things." Lyanna's lips curved. "I miss this place," he admitted, voice low. "It feels more like home than the bed I sleep in." Benjen nodded. "Some men say the old gods are silent, that they don't answer prayers. But I think they see us, hear us, even if they keep their own counsel." Lyanna studied her younger brother, recalling how he used to scamper at her heels, begging her to let him ride her horse. He had changed, though traces of that eager boy remained in his open expression. "How have you fared?" she asked quietly. "Since the war ended." He shrugged. "I've tried to do my duty." The Night's Watch came calling for new recruits, and for a while, I considered it. The war cost me dear friends, and I thought perhaps to devote my life to something larger. But Ned says I should wait, that the family needs me here. So I remain. Damn. She reached for his hand, gave it a squeeze. "You're a Stark," she said gently. "You have a place here, but your choice is your own. Don't let anyone else decide your fate for you." He smiled faintly. "You always did say that. I suppose I was too young to heed you before." She looked toward the face in the weirwood. "I wish I could make sense of it all," she murmured. "Why things happened the way they did. Why people must suffer and die. Why secrets must be kept. Why love can turn to tragedy so swiftly." Benjen lowered his gaze. "I don't have the answers," he said. "But we're alive. That must count for something." She exhaled, nodding slowly. "Yes," she agreed. "It does." Rising from the stone, she moved closer to the water's edge, letting her reflection dance across the surface. She saw the lines of worry around her eyes, the new hardness to her features that had replaced youthful exuberance. Turning back to Benjen, she said, "Ned intends to gather the bannermen." Benjen crossed his arms, regarding her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You'll face them all." She set her jaw. "Don't. Yes. Whatever scorn or question they bring, I'll answer. I'm tired of living in the shadow of what people imagine me to be." Benjen nodded, stepping forward to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'll stand with you," he said. "We're Starks. We stand as a pack, or we fall." She smiled a tiny, heartfelt smile. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to gaze once more at the silent weirwood. "We stand as a pack," she repeated, letting the old gods bear witness. The next days passed in a measured, unhurried rhythm. Lyanna occupied herself by reacquainting with the castle, visiting the libraries, the kitchens, the training yard. She took solitary rides beyond the walls, but always returned in time to fulfill whatever duties Ned asked of her. Though he did not openly declare her role in daily governance, he did begin consulting her on minor issues pertaining to the castle and its immediate lands, perhaps to ease her back into life at Winterfell. Lyanna found it oddly fulfilling to discuss the distribution of grain stores, the planning of winter provisions, the management of stable rotations for the horses. She felt a faint sense of purpose stirring in her chest, reminding her that she was not merely a figure returned from the dead, but a living force who could shape events still to come. She also occasionally joined the men in the training yard, though she refrained from donning practice armor or wielding a blade in any official capacity. Instead, she observed from the sidelines, her fingers itching with the memory of a sword's weight. One day, she dared to pluck up a wooden practice blade, left abandoned after a squire had finished. She tested its balance, found it wanting, then stepped forward and gave a few test swings, ignoring the stares of the onlookers. A handful of watchers murmured in surprise. She felt the old exhilaration stir in her, the rush of controlling her body in a disciplined dance with the sword. Sir Roderick Castle approached, clearing his throat politely. He was the master-at-arms, a man of grizzled hair and a stern, kind face. He eyed the wooden blade in her hand, but did not immediately chastise her. Instead, he said quietly, "You've the stance of someone who's trained before. Would you like to join the drills, my lady?" Lyanna hesitated, feeling the attention of several men. In the old days, she would have leapt at the opportunity, but now she was painfully aware that times had changed. Her lips parted, and she heard herself say, "Perhaps another time." Handing back the wooden sword, she lowered her gaze. "Thank you, Sir Roderick." She turned and left, ignoring the swirl of disappointment in her chest. In that moment she realized that, although she was home, she was not entirely free to return to the carefree ways of her youth. There were expectations, both from the men who served Ned and from the wider realm. She could not so easily upend them, not if she intended to earn respect rather than scorn. One evening, she joined Ned for a supper of roast venison and spiced wine. The meal was shared in a modest side chamber, away from the gaze of the entire household. Caitlin had joined briefly, but excused herself to tend to baby Rob, leaving Lyanna and Ned in a companionable hush. Over the remnants of the meal, Ned finally voiced an idea he had been turning over in his mind. "You know I've taken up the mantle of Warden of the North after Father," he said quietly, pushing aside his goblet. "The Northern Lords look to me for leadership, to keep them united under the crown. But I've responsibilities in King's Landing as well. Robert demands my presence at times, council sessions and the like. It's not so easy to travel between the capital and Winterfell, especially with winter looming in a few years' time." Lyanna studied him, trying to glean the shape of his thoughts. "Ned, if you need me to help you here, I will." He nodded, gratitude in his expression. "I do need you. I need someone I can trust to keep watch over the North when I must be away. Our bannermen will look to you, as they look to me, if you are willing." "So." She felt her heart thrumming. "What do you mean?" she asked, though the hope in her voice was clear. "You are a Stark," he said simply. "The North knows your face, your name. You have the blood of our father in your veins, the spirit of the wolf. If I name you as my Castellan, or in an even more official capacity, the lords may balk at first. Unconventional as it might be, but they would come to respect it, if you prove yourself as capable as I know you are." Her breath caught in her throat. She had imagined returning to Winterfell as nothing more than a quiet presence, but to hold an actual position of authority, to help govern. "They want to accept a woman in such a role so easily," she murmured. "Not after everything." Ned's gaze hardened with a quiet determination. "They'll have to learn," he said. "If I decree it as Warden of the North, that is law. You'll need to stand firm, show them you're worthy. But I know you can." She felt a rush of conflicting emotions, excitement, apprehension, the headiness of possibility. She thought of the times she had dreamed of leading armies or riding at the forefront of a cause, though she had never believed it truly possible in a world that so often dismissed women's capabilities. I'll do it," she whispered, her voice catching. "If you think it wise, I won't refuse." Ned reached for her hand across the table, gripping it firmly. "I do," he said. "We'll start by confirming your presence in Winterfell at the gathering. We'll see how the bannermen react. And in time, if all goes well, I'll name you officially to stand in my stead when I must be away." "That's awesome." Lyanna swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. It was a chance to forge a new legacy, to prove herself more than the tragedy or the scandal that people believed her to be. She would show them that Lyanna Stark was worthy of respect, that she could honor the North as fiercely as any man. The days slipped by in an uneventful calm. Messages were sent across the North, beckoning the bannermen to gather at Winterfell in the next move's turn. Lyanna busied herself by learning the details of running the castle from Maester Luwin and from Roderick Castle. She accompanied them through the storehouses, took note of the armory's supplies, inquired about the training of new recruits. She took each task seriously, soaking up knowledge, determined to be prepared for whatever challenges came her way. Caitlin observed her with polite detachment at first, though over time, her curiosity seemed to grow. One evening, as Lyanna was leaving the library, she found the lady waiting for her outside the door. The torchlight flickered upon Catelyn's auburn hair, making it look like copper touched by flame. "You work tirelessly," Caitlin said with a small incline of her head. "I'm impressed by your dedication." Lyanna could not tell if the words were meant as praise or a subtle warning. She answered nonetheless. "There's much to learn. I don't want to fail." Caitlin studied her for a moment. "Winterfell can be a lonely place," she said softly. "With Ned away sometimes and the weight of responsibility. If you need a friend, or simply someone to speak to, I hope you'll consider me." Lyanna, who had steeled herself against any show of vulnerability before this woman, felt her guard slip a fraction. "I appreciate that," she replied, managing a faint smile. "I know we've had little time to truly know each other." Caitlin nodded, seeming to accept that as the answer it was. She stepped aside to let Lyanna pass, and Lyanna could not help but wonder what thoughts lingered behind those thoughtful blue eyes. Still, she felt oddly comforted by the gesture, and as she made her way down the corridor to her chambers, she realized that forging alliances within her own household would be essential if she was to succeed. At last, the day came when the first of the bannermen arrived, banners snapping in the cold breeze as riders filed into the courtyard. Lyanna stood on the steps beside Ned, her posture straight and regal, eyes forward. She wore a dark gray gown embroidered with a running direwolf at the hem, an unmistakable symbol of House Stark. Her hair, still shorter than before, had been brushed smooth, and a silver clasp at her shoulder held a fur-lined cloak in place. She looked every inch a northern lady, albeit one whose eyes glinted with quiet fervor. Lord Manderley arrived with his retinue, then Lord Glover, Lord Serwyn, Lady Mormont, and many others. They dismounted, bowed to Ned, and looked with open astonishment upon Lyanna de Adar. Some made the sign respect to her as well, unsure of the protocol, while others paused in confusion. Murmurs spread quickly around the courtyard, a ripple of speculation and disbelief. Lyanna kept her composure, meeting their gazes with a calm she did not entirely feel. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she willed her face to remain calm, her spine unbending. One grizzled northern lord, clad in heavy furs, approached with a deliberate pace. His beard was shot through with gray, and a scar marked his brow. He stared at Lyanna for a tense moment, then gave a slight tilt of his head. "They said you were dead," he rumbled, voice like distant thunder. "But it seems you Starks are not so easy to kill. Welcome back, my lady." "Bah." The words, though brusque, carried a note of acceptance. Lyanna inclined her head graciously. "Thank you, my lord. It's good to stand in Winterfell's courtyard once more." A small gathering of lesser lords lingered behind, whispering among themselves, casting curious, uncertain glances. She could almost feel their questions. Why had Lyanna Stark returned? Was she truly the same girl they remembered from before the war? Had she been soiled by Targaryen captivity? Would she disrupt the order of things? She forced herself to remain poised, offering a courteous greeting to each new arrival, letting Ned provide the formal welcomes. When the last of the lords arrived, Ned led them all into the great hall for feasting. A roaring fire crackled in the massive hearth, and long tables groaned under the weight of meats, bread, and winter vegetables. Servants scurried to and fro, filling cups with ale and wine, ensuring all were fed and comfortable. Lyanna sat to Ned's left at the high table, while Catelyn sat to his right. The seating arrangement itself was a statement, one that did not go unnoticed. As the meal progressed, voices rose in conversation, mixing with the clatter of knives and cups. Lyanna took measured bites, occasionally speaking to the lords on her side. Some asked cautious questions about her health, her time away, and she answered with carefully chosen words, never betraying the full truth. Others offered pointed remarks about the events that had led to Robert's rebellion, to which she merely replied that war had taken many lives, and it was best they looked to the future now. She could feel the tension in the room, but also a growing curiosity. The North was a land of proud, straightforward people. They might hold their suspicions, but they respected resilience, and Lyanna sensed they were testing whether she carried the necessary fortitude to stand among them as a leader. Ned rose near the meal's end, commanding the hall's attention. All eyes turned to him, and he spoke of the burdens they had borne, the homes destroyed in the war, the families shattered. He spoke of the crown's expectations and the importance of standing united as Northerners. Then he turned to Lyanna, gesturing for her to stand. Swallowing the knot in her throat, she rose, face calm. "My sister," Ned said to the assembled lords, "has returned to us. Many believed her lost, but the gods saw fit to spare her life. I ask that you welcome her back to Winterfell as a Stark of the North. She is family, and it is my wish that she be granted every courtesy afforded to a lady of her standing." A rumble of acknowledgement spread across the tables. Lyanna felt both a surge of gratitude for Ned's public endorsement and a flicker of nerves at the weight of so many gazes. "In the days ahead," Ned continued, "I may have need to travel south. My duties as Warden of the North and my obligations to the king will at times take me from Winterfell. My lady wife, Catelyn, will hold the seat in my absence, but she is new to our land. Thus, I rely as well on the counsel and service of my sister, a true daughter of House Stark. Let it be known that I trust Lyanna to speak and act on behalf of our house, that the interests of the North might be safeguarded. Should you have disputes, petitions, or need, you may bring them to her as you would to me." Now, dead silence reigned for a moment. Lyanna felt her heart hammering. Then a few voices, hesitant at first, echoed support. "Hear, hear, as you say, my lord," rumbled from the side, and a scattered applause took root. It was not universal. A handful of lords exchanged uncertain glances, and a few appeared outright displeased. But no one stood to openly object. Lyanna breathed again, her shoulders relaxing incrementally. When Ned resumed his seat, so did Lyanna, grateful to let the wave of attention pass. She snuck a glance at him, offering a small, wordless smile. He returned it, his own relief evident. The feast continued, music striking up from a small group of minstrels. Flagons of ale and wine were passed more liberally, and conversation turned to simpler topics. Lyanna fielded the occasional question from those near her about matters of local governance, land disputes, or the upcoming harvest, though she answered with measured composure. Inside, she marveled at the enormity of it all. She was forging a new path, one that might lead her to become something no one in the North had ever witnessed before. A woman leading in an official capacity beneath the banner of the direwolf. Eventually, the feast wound down, and lords retired to guest chambers or lingered in smaller gatherings to drink and gossip. Lyanna slipped away to her own chambers, the echo of music trailing behind her. Once inside, she bolted the door, letting out a long, trembling sigh. The mantle of responsibility weighed on her shoulders, and she could already sense the battles ahead. Yet a flicker of pride mingled with the fear. She removed her cloak, letting it slide off her shoulders, and sank onto the edge of the bed. For a moment, she thought of the child she had borne and lost in the torrent of secrecy. She prayed for his safety in another's care, hoping her sacrifices would one day be justified. Then she thought of what it might mean if she succeeded in this role, how she could shape the North, protect her people, and perhaps at last redeem her name in the eyes of those who blamed her for the war. When she closed her eyes, she pictured herself astride a horse, riding under the banner of the direwolf, head high. She thought of the words of House Stark, "Winter is coming," and she vowed that when winter came, she would be ready. She slept fitfully, dreams haunted by the ghosts of the past. The clash of steel, the roar of the trident, the hush of a tower room. Yet when she woke in the early hours, the faint light of dawn creeping through the shutters, she felt a stirring of resolve. Rising, she washed and dressed, braiding back her hair as best she could, and then stepped out into the corridor. She made her way to the great hall, determined to begin the day ready to meet the lords and listen to their concerns, to show them that she was no mere ornament on Ned's side. Catelyn was already there, cradling baby Robb, while servants cleared away the remnants of last night's festivities. Lyanna paused, greeting her sister-in-law with a polite nod. Catelyn returned the gesture, then hesitated. "Your nephew is awake," she said softly, shifting Robb in her arms. "Would you Like to hold him? For a moment, Lyanna froze. She hadn't expected the offer. A kaleidoscope of emotions whirled inside her. Slowly, she extended her arms, and Caitlin placed the child there. Rob stared up at Lyanna wide-eyed, innocent. A tuft of auburn hair topped his head, a reminder of his mother's coloring, though his face hinted at stark features too. Lyanna felt a rush of tenderness, followed by a pang of sorrow. She bent her head, pressing a soft kiss to Rob's brow. The baby cooed, grasping clumsily at the ends of her braid. Lyanna couldn't help the small, tearful laugh that escaped her. "You'll be a fine aunt," Caitlin said gently, watching the scene. "I think he knows you already." Lyanna cradled the child, wishing she could freeze this moment. She felt the sting of tears threatening but willed them away. She would be strong for Rob, for Ned, for the child she had lost. Perhaps one day, if the gods were merciful, she could be reunited with the son she would forever guard in secret. Until then, she would devote herself to the north, become the shield that stood against the cold winds. She rocked Rob gently, letting the softness of his gaze remind her of why she needed to be strong. Across the hall, a few of the bannermen had begun to trickle in, exchanging quiet remarks as they saw Lyanna holding the heir to Winterfell. She caught their looks but did not shrink from them. Instead, she held Rob a little closer, meeting their stares with quiet confidence. In that instant, she understood that leadership was not purely about force or birthright. It was about caring for those who depended on you, about offering them shelter and hope in the harshest of winters. As she handed Rob back to Caitlin, she took a steadying breath. Ahead lay conversations, alliances, perhaps arguments with lords who distrusted a woman's role in governance. But she would face all that with her head unbowed. For she was Lyanna Stark, a daughter of Winterfell, who had returned from the brink of death to serve her land. Let them come with their questions and doubts. She would stand her ground, like the ancient weirwood in the Godswood, roots deep in the soil of the north. And in time, she would show them all that the blood of wolves ran as true in her veins as it ever had in any Stark before her. Lyanna woke the next morning to the tap of a servant's knuckles on her chamber door. She blinked in the pale light, disoriented from unsettling dreams in which snow fell crimson as a battlefield, and towers crumbled into dust under a leaden sky. She rose, shrugging off the last clinging fragments of nightmare, and called for the servant to enter. A young girl with flaxen braids stepped in, curtsying shyly. She carried a small basin of hot water that steamed in the cold air. Lyanna thanked her, then dismissed her with a wave of the hand. She took her time washing, letting the warm water chase away the chill that seemed to hover in her bones each morning. She had not yet grown used to sleeping beneath thick fur coverlets while a north wind whistled outside. Or perhaps some part of her soul never stopped shivering after the ravages of war and near death. Once washed, she pulled on a simple gray gown, braided her hair in a single plait over her shoulder, and pinned a wolf head brooch near her collar. She regarded herself in the small glass. Her features were sharper than they had been before the war, and her eyes carried shadows that sleep seldom erased. Still, there was a certain composure to her face now, a subtle hint of calm that arose from having made her decision to remain in Winterfell, to serve it. She stepped into the corridor and made her way toward the great hall, listening for the hum of conversation, the clink of plates and cups. She arrived to find the hall partly filled, though not as crowded as the previous night. Many lords had drunk themselves into a stupor at the feast, and would doubtless awaken later. But a few early risers were here, nibbling on bread or sipping mulled ale, while warming themselves near the hearth. Lyanna paused just inside the doorway, letting her gaze travel across the gathered men and women. She recognized some from the night before. Lord Glover, leaning over a table and murmuring with a companion. Lady Mormont, her stern face set, finishing a plate of eggs, and a pair of lower-ranking knights from the Risewell family, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Conversation dimmed a fraction when they noticed her. A hush, a shuffle of feet, a few guarded nods. She lifted her chin and moved forward to the table where Sir Roderick Castle sat. The older knight stood at her approach and gave a respectful bow. He indicated a chair beside him, and she took it, acknowledging the subdued greetings of the men across from her. Lord Serwyn's younger son stared with open curiosity, and she forced herself to meet his gaze, offering the ghost of a smile. It was better to face them openly than shrink beneath suspicion. She asked Sir Roderick if he had any news of the morning. He stroked his whiskers, nodding. "Maester Lewin has a list of petitions for you and Lord Stark," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Some involve boundary disputes between lesser houses. Some are requests for additional grain. A few might be resolved quickly, but a couple are complicated. You'll have them all soon." "Thank you," she answered quietly. "I'll look them over." He eyed her, as if trying to gauge the measure of the woman who had returned under such a swirl of rumor and tragedy. Whatever he saw, he merely inclined his head, then rose to gather his cloak. He said something about checking the armory, leaving Lyanna alone with a slab of bread and a cup of watered wine. She picked at the bread, her thoughts drifting. The hush around her pressed in, underscoring that while Ned had spoken openly on her behalf, many in the north still didn't know what to make of her. The best she could do was earn their respect, piece by piece. She finished quickly and made her way out through the eastern archway that led to a small courtyard ringed by a colonnade. New sunlight touched the flagstones, half of them still slick with ice, but a few patches had warmed enough to show hints of the stone beneath. She paused by one of the carved pillars, letting the sun's rays brush her face. There, she spotted Lady Mormont making her way outside. The Lady of Bear Island was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a cloak of bearskin. Her hair, streaked with silver, hung loose. When she saw Lyanna, she pressed her lips together and paused. "My lady," Lyanna greeted, dipping her head with genuine respect. "Lyanna Stark," Lady Mormont answered, regarding her with a level gaze. "So, you live?" "I do," Lyanna said simply. Lady Mormont's face betrayed neither suspicion nor warmth, only an unyielding frankness. "We have not had the chance to speak, though I remember you faintly from your younger days, galloping about the castle as if the entire world were your playground." She gave a soft snort, her gaze flicking to Lyanna's braided hair. "That was before everything." Lyanna did not shy from her stare. "Much has changed, my lady, but I remain a Stark, whatever people may whisper." Lady Mormont folded her arms. "People whisper plenty. Some say you were Rhaegar Targaryen's paramour, that you went willingly, sparking war. Others say you were taken by force. Hard to know which story is the truth." "Ma'am, I said it in her whisper." A cold wind teased the courtyard, stirring the fur around Lyanna's shoulders. She chose her words carefully. "I cannot deny that my involvement with the prince played a part in the rebellion's start," she said. "The circumstances are not easily summed, but I can tell you this: war came, and I regret the lives lost. Yet none of us can alter the past." Lady Mormont studied her face. "Fair enough," she allowed. "And now? Lord Stark names you to help govern the North. Some will doubt your readiness." "Damn the water." Lyanna straightened, finding herself unexpectedly eager for Lady Mormont's approval. "Let them doubt," she said. "They'll see soon enough whether I'm prepared for the task. I haven't returned to hide in the shadows." The older woman gave a curt nod. "Good," she said. "Bear Island doesn't truck with half measures. We stand behind the Starks we believe in, but we expect real strength and loyalty in return. If Ned Stark trusts you to lead in his stead, I'll watch what you do with my own eyes. Don't disappoint me." "Nance." She turned sharply, cloak whipping around her boots, and strode toward the gate. Lyanna let out a slow breath. Lady Mormont's blunt approach felt oddly bracing, like an icy wave that could wash away old illusions. She understood that the road to acceptance might be paved with skepticism, but at least her intentions were clear. She would do her duty, no matter how many stares followed her in the halls. She crossed the courtyard, heading in the direction of the Maester's tower. She passed clusters of newly arrived men-at-arms, and servants bustling about with supplies for the day's gatherings. A hush fell over them when they saw her, and a few dipped their heads. She acknowledged them with a quick nod, continuing onward until she climbed the spiral steps leading to Maester Lewin's domain. At the top, the Maester himself greeted her, his chain of varied metals glinting in the torchlight of the narrow passage. He led her to a small solar crammed with books and scrolls. She had to duck beneath a low-hanging shelf to enter. A large table stood in the center, piled with parchment, quills, ink, and half-finished letters. The air smelled of dust and candle wax. "Good morning, my lady," Lewin said, gesturing toward one of the seats. "I've compiled a list of matters that require your attention." His tone was mild, respectful. If he harbored any reservations about her presence here, he had hidden them well. Lyanna took the seat, resting her hands on the table's rough surface. "What are we dealing with?" He slid a parchment in front of her. On it, neat lines of writing delineated each matter. "There's a boundary dispute between House Flint and a group of free folk who moved south of the Gift," he explained, tapping the first item. "Lord Flint insists they're encroaching on land that has belonged to his family for generations. The free folk argue they settled in the area after the war left it deserted, and no one claimed the land for themselves." She squinted at the note, recalling how the Gift was that stretch of territory originally granted to the Night's Watch. Much of it had gone to disuse or was poorly defended, leading to confusion. "And House Flint demands we force them out? That or tax them accordingly," Lewin said with a wry tilt of his mouth. "These free folk have little coin, as you can imagine, and since many are newly arrived from beyond the wall, they distrust lords and laws. They may not submit easily." Lyanna nodded, making a mental note to speak with Ned about how best to navigate it. But Ned was likely busy in council with various lords, or seeing to his own endless tasks. She pressed her lips together. "What are the next items?" He tapped the second line. "House Dustin requests compensation for livestock lost during the tumult after the war. They claim roving bandits from the eastern hills raided their herds. They want you to dispatch men to track the brigands down, or else reimburse the losses from Winterfell's coffers." Lyanna glanced at the rest of the list. There were half a dozen more issues, each with its own complications. She exhaled, half daunted, half resolute. "Very well. Let's do this step by step. For House Flint and the Free Folk, we should send a royal representative to talk with both sides, gather the facts before taking action. Someone who isn't biased toward the lords. Maybe. Do we have a sworn shield or steward who is well-spoken, who can negotiate?" "None." Lewin's brows lifted. "I can think of a few. I'll compile a small list of potential envoys." She nodded. "Good. Let me know. As for House Dustin, we can't simply hand them coin without investigating. Robberies happen, but we need proof. Have they provided details of these brigands? Anyone captured or identified? If not, I might consider sending a small force to scout the area and confirm the threat." "Nay. Prudent," Lewin agreed, marking something down. "It's wise to approach each matter with care. The North is vast, but rumor travels quickly, and every decision can shape how you're seen." Lyanna gripped the table's edge. She knew he spoke gently, a subtle reminder of the scrutiny she was under. "I won't rush any judgments," she promised. "Better to proceed carefully than to give them cause to accuse me of favoritism or negligence." The maester bestowed a measured smile, swiftly rolling up the parchment. "I will prepare messages to each party. Then, in a few days, we can convene and discuss any replies or new details. Is there anything else, my lady?" She considered, then asked after the health of the small folk in Winterfell's outlying villages. Lewin explained that the winter had been mild so far, but reminded her that a true northern winter could come swiftly and linger fiercely. Lyanna listened intently, instructing him to keep careful accounts of the grain stored in each holdfast. "No one starves if we can help it," she said quietly. "We must be ready." When they were done, she left the tower feeling a sense of purpose coiling in her belly. This was the work that truly mattered, not the illusions of courtly gossip, but the real and practical tasks of seeing to the North's well-being. As she descended the steps, she overheard a snippet of conversation through a nearby window. Two voices were talking in low tones in the courtyard below, close enough that their words drifted upward. "Never known a woman to sit in council. The men say it's unnatural." Perhaps so, but Lord Stark gave her authority. Hard to gainsay that, unless someone wants to challenge him directly. Lyanna paused, letting the words settle. Her hands tightened briefly on the banister. She reminded herself That acceptance would not come all at once. She needed to prove herself, and that meant continuing forward, no matter how many whispers reached her ears. She stepped into the corridor, only to see Caitlin approaching with her head slightly bowed, reading a slip of parchment. At the sight of Lyanna, she paused and lifted her eyes. "Good morning," she greeted. "I hope you slept well." Lyanna nodded, noticing the faint lines of tiredness around Caitlin's own eyes. "And you?" Rob was restless, Caitlin admitted with a mild chuckle. "He's a sweet child, but as all mothers discover, nights can be long." A flicker of something, sympathy, envy, passed through Lyanna, but she quelled it. Instead, she said, "I'm sure he'll be a fine heir to Winterfell, given time. He has the Stark blood and the Tully warmth." Caitlin accepted the compliment graciously, folding the parchment in her hands. "Ned has asked me to accompany him to meet with Lord Glover's party this afternoon. You should join us. It's a chance to show a united front." Lyanna weighed the idea. Part of her wanted to focus on the petitions she had discussed with Lewin, but she recognized the importance of forging alliances face to face. "Yes," she said. "I'll come." They walked together in silence for a moment, descending the tower steps. When they reached the courtyard, they found Ned and a small retinue of guards already preparing to ride out. Lord Glover's men had camped about 2 miles from Winterfell at a village near the Wolfswood, wishing to discuss certain provisions. Ned looked relieved to see Lyanna, and he greeted Caitlin with a gentle nod, placing a hand lightly on her arm. Then he turned to Lyanna. "Are you ready?" he asked, scanning her face. Lyanna inclined her head. "I am." He gestured to the stable boys, who brought forth their horses. Ned's gray stallion, Caitlin's chestnut palfrey, and a dark bay mare for Lyanna. The day was bright, though a chill wind blew across the yard. Gathering her cloak around her shoulders, Lyanna mounted her horse with care, mindful of the lingering stiffness in her hips. The others formed up around them. A few guardsmen wearing cloaks emblazoned with the direwolf, and 2 of Ned's closest advisors. Together, they rode out through the gate, the iron portcullis rattling overhead. The path to the village was well traveled, winding between patches of forest and the snow-dusted fields. Conversation was sparse along the way, but Lyanna took comfort in the rhythmic clop of hooves and the soft swirl of breath exhaled by the horses in the cold air. She found her gaze drifting at times to Ned, riding near the front with his posture upright. He had taken on so many responsibilities: Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, husband and father. And now, a quiet vow to support Lyanna's unprecedented role. She wondered if his own burdens ever felt too heavy, but he carried them with that unassuming stoicism she remembered from their youth. Before long, they reached the village. A handful of cottages clustered around a well, and a larger wooden hall with a sloping roof stood at the edge of the clearing. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and small folk paused their labors to watch the newcomers approach. A woman in a patched cloak drew her children close, bowing her head. Lyanna offered the slightest smile in return, hoping to convey some kindness. Lord Glover and a few of his men awaited them outside the hall. Glover was a stout man, with a thick beard and a quiet, unflinching manner. He stepped forward to greet Ned, clasping his forearm in a warrior's handshake, then bowed to Caitlin and Lyanna. There was a hint of guardedness in his expression, though he did not shirk courtesy. They entered the hall, which smelled of wood smoke, salted fish, and stale ale. A few torches lit the walls, and benches lined the interior. As they took seats at a rough-hewn table, Glover explained the purpose of the meeting. He wanted to expand his holdings along a stretch of land near the Wolfswood, which had been somewhat abandoned during the war. He hoped to move settlers there, start lumber gathering again, maybe build a small palisade for protection. But he needed Winterfell's formal permission and the promise of soldiers to guard against outlaws. Glover's tone was measured, each word carefully chosen. Ned listened intently, then turned to Lyanna in a move that was clearly intentional, showing the men that she too had a say. "Sister," he said, "you've heard Lord Glover's request. What do you think?" She glanced at Glover, gauging his reaction to being addressed by her. His beard twitched slightly, though he met her eyes without obvious disdain. "Lord Glover," she said, I recognize the need to reclaim lands that have fallen to neglect. If these areas lie within your ancient boundaries, re-establishing them can bring greater prosperity. Yet the North is full of lawless pockets these days, with men who fled the war or deserted from armies. You'll need strong defenses. Nesh. He nodded. Exactly so. My men can handle themselves, but not if the outlaws are numerous. I need the king's peace enforced. Winterfell is our overlord, so I ask your blessing and some support. Perhaps a company of archers or cavalry to patrol the area until we're settled. Lyanna glanced at Ned. He gave an imperceptible nod, deferring to her lead. She addressed Glover again. The king's peace applies, yes, but we must ensure that you can sustain these holdings without drawing too heavily on Winterfell's forces. We can send a small detachment to help guard the settlement's first months, but we'll have to withdraw some men eventually. A flicker of respect crossed his eyes. As if surprised, she spoke with practicality. Agreed. Once we're established, my own forces will suffice. Lyanna took a breath. Very well. I'll see to it that a letter of sanction is drawn. We can spare a few men-at-arms for a limited time, under the condition that you provide them with supplies, a share of food, lodging, and so forth. They will remain until the new outpost is self-sufficient. After that, the men must return to Winterfell or to their families. Ned. Glover folded his hands on the table, nodding. A fair arrangement. He glanced at Ned. My lord, does that sit well with you? Ned offered a firm nod. It does. We'll finalize it in writing before you leave Winterfell. With that, the tension in the hall eased. Glover's men relaxed, and a few traded satisfied grunts. Ned took a moment to bring up related issues, roads in the region, trade with the White Harbor route, the possibility of employing local smallfolk. Lyanna allowed her attention to drift to the space beyond the men, where a row of battered shields hung on the far wall, each bearing the sigil of House Glover, a gauntleted fist. She recalled visiting Glover lands as a child, riding in caravans with her father, and how she had once raced her horse along the edges of a wide green meadow near Deepwood Motte, ignoring the scolding of the guards who tried to keep up. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else, a free-spirited girl unaware of the storms on the horizon. Eventually the business concluded, and they rose. Glover offered to share a meal, but Ned politely declined, citing other matters requiring their attention. Glover bowed to each of them, extending a brief courtesy to Catelyn as well, and then he addressed Lyanna directly. I look forward to seeing this matter through, he said. I hope the rest of the North sees what I see. That House Stark, including all its members, is ready to lead. His words carried a hint of genuine respect, and Lyanna inclined her head. May your new lands flourish, she said. We stand behind those who serve the North faithfully. When they emerged from the hall, the sun had climbed higher, lending a fleeting warmth to the day. Lyanna and Ned conferred briefly with their guards, then mounted up. As they prepared to ride out, she noticed one of Glover's men, a tall, wiry fellow with a face tanned by years of rough work, watching her from the corner of his eye. She met his gaze, and he offered the slightest dip of his head. She urged her horse forward, reflecting on how a single conversation, fairly handled, might begin to shift opinions. They rode back at a leisurely pace, talking quietly. Ned reined in beside Lyanna, letting Catelyn ride a few paces ahead with 2 guards. That went well, he murmured. You handled yourself with poise. Lord Glover seemed impressed. Nah. Lyanna shrugged, though inside she felt relief. He was open to reason. Others might be more stubborn. Ned sighed, the sound carrying centuries of Stark burdens. Yes, but step by step you're proving yourself. And it matters that we face them together, that they see you're no mere figurehead. She cast him a sidelong look, grateful for the support. Thank you, she said softly. I know you risk criticism too, naming a sister who was once rumored to cause scandal. But I promise I won't fail you. He reached over, briefly resting a calloused hand atop hers. You won't fail the North, he said with conviction. Then he released her hand and nudged his stallion into a faster trot. drawing alongside Caitlin. Lyanna smiled faintly, hugging her cloak tighter as a breeze drifted through the trees. They arrived back in Winterfell in the early afternoon, greeted by a flurry of activity in the courtyard, lords arriving, horses stamping. The stablemaster hurried to attend them. Lyanna dismounted carefully, wincing at a twinge in her side. The ride had been jarring on the half-frozen roads. She handed her reins to a stableboy, who offered a respectful "and now, lady." As soon as she stepped onto the stone walkway, Sir Roderick approached, his face pinched with some urgency. "My lady," he said, bowing, "Maester Lewin asked me to find you. There's an issue involving a traveler who claims to be from the south." He appeared at the gates demanding an audience with House Stark. The guards brought him to the Great Hall. Lyanna exchanged a glance with Ned. He gave a slight shrug. "We'll see what he wants," she said. "Thank you, Sir Roderick." They made their way inside. The Great Hall was dimmer today, the hearth fire lower, with fewer visitors milling about. Near the main entrance, flanked by guards, stood a middle-aged man in dusty garments. His cloak was frayed, and the smell of sweat and horse clung to him. He clutched a small leather pack in one hand. When Lyanna and Ned approached, he sank into a deep bow. "Lord Stark," he said in a reed-thin voice, "I come with a message from King Robert." At once, Ned's demeanor shifted. "From the king? You've traveled far, it seems. How did you come to be alone?" The man swallowed. "I started with an escort, but we were set upon by brigands. I escaped with my life, my horse, and the sealed message. The king instructed me to deliver it directly to your hand, my lord." Ned gestured for a guard to search the man briefly. Satisfied he bore no weapons beyond a small knife, they let him approach. He pulled a parchment from his pack, sealed with the stag and crown of House Baratheon. Ned took it, glancing at Lyanna before breaking the seal. He unrolled the parchment and scanned the contents. A flicker of concern crossed his features. "What does it say?" Lyanna asked, stepping closer. Ned lifted his eyes, voice edged with tension. "King Robert requests my presence at court within the next moon's turn. There is to be a tourney at King's Landing, supposedly in celebration of his victory and to honor the realm's new era. He wants me there, and likely wishes to hear news of the North firsthand." Lyanna felt an uneasy chill. A summons from Robert might seem harmless, but she knew politics could lurk behind the friendliest invitation. "And you must go." He hesitated. "He's my king, my friend, or so I hope. It would be taken as an insult if I refused. I'll likely have to answer the summons." "Menam Norandi." She looked away, her mind spinning with the implications. If Ned left, the North would look to her. And it might not be easy to hold them all in line without Ned's steady presence, especially with the realm still in flux. But she swallowed her nerves, forcing a calm front. "Then we'll make preparations." Ned slid the parchment into his cloak. "Aye, we shall." The herald from King's Landing, pale with exhaustion, wobbled on his feet. Ned motioned for a servant. "See that this man is given a meal, a place to rest. When he's fit to travel again, he can continue on." The traveler murmured his thanks, casting a curious glance at Lyanna before being escorted away. Once alone, she turned to Ned. "When do you depart?" "Within a fortnight, I think," he said, sounding resigned. "I can't set out this very moment. There are matters here to settle, but I can't delay too long. Robert will expect me." The corners of Lyanna's mouth pulled downward in worry. "Then this is happening sooner than we expected. If you go, Caitlin will remain, I assume?" "Miptim?" "Yes," Ned said. "She'll manage the household matters. But for broader concerns, disputes among lords, decisions about land or justice, I named you to handle them. You'll share the responsibility." She folded her arms, feeling the weight settle on her shoulders more tangibly than ever. "I won't fail you," she repeated, though she wasn't certain if she spoke more to reassure him or herself. Ned's expression softened. "Come, let's discuss it in private." They climbed the stone steps, heading to one of the smaller solar rooms where a fire crackled. Ned had closed the door behind them. Light streamed in from narrow windows, casting elongated shadows across the bare table in the center. Lyanna slipped off her cloak and sat, curling her fingers around the arms of the wooden chair. Ned remained standing for a moment, gazing at the fire. I had hoped for more time, he confessed. Time for the North to become comfortable with you at my side, to let the dust of the war fully settle. But Robert's summons, I can't refuse. She nodded, understanding. When you arrive in King's Landing, do you think Robert will press you for answers about me? She recalled how Robert Baratheon had once been betrothed to her, how the war had partly sparked from his rage at her supposed abduction. Even now, the memory of that betrothal left a sour taste in her mouth. Robert had once professed to love her, but it was a love she had never truly felt in return. I imagine he'll have questions, Ned said. But I'll do what I can to protect you. The truth about everything. About your child, about Rhaegar. The realm cannot know. She lowered her gaze. I'm grateful, but I also know he might not be content with a simple story. Ned inhaled slowly, pressing his lips together. I'll be careful, he promised. Robert's temper is unpredictable, but I believe he'll accept a version of events that spares his pride. He has his throne now. He's king, and he's never liked to dwell on painful memories. Lyanna nodded, her teeth worrying at her lower lip. If I am to hold matters in the North, I must be ready for the Lords. Some will test my authority openly once you're gone. I know, Ned said, at last taking a seat across from her. I'll leave as many of our most loyal men here as I can. Sir Roderick Wyman Manderley, perhaps Lady Mormont can be convinced to lend her voice in support. They all respect me, but they must learn to respect you as well. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, tension coiling in her belly. Respect doesn't come automatically, especially from those who still hold me responsible for the war's beginnings. But I'll earn it, Ned. Let them see I won't bend easily. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. I have faith in you. Truly. None of this has been easy, but you're a Stark, remember that. Our ancestors bound the North in oath and blood. We endure. Lyanna. She squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of warmth and gratitude. I'll do my duty, she whispered, voice tight with emotion. And you must do yours. We'll see each other again once Robert's demands are satisfied. A sorrow flickered in his eyes, perhaps recalling how unpredictable life and fate could be. But he inclined his head. Yes, he said gently. We will. Word spread quickly of Ned's forthcoming journey. Over the next few days, the lords still in Winterfell bade farewell, offering safe travels and pledging cooperation in his absence. Some left behind uncertain stares for Lyanna, others extended polite acknowledgments. Each night, by the flickering light of candles, Lyanna studied the records Luwin provided, determined to master the intricacies of local disputes. She practiced her measured tone in her head, the careful words she'd use to mediate conflict. She summoned the memory of Lady Mormont's blunt gaze, reminding herself that the North respected strength, fairness, and loyalty above all. She intended to embody those qualities. On the morning of Ned's departure, the courtyard was alive with activity. The sun barely peeked over the walls as stableboys ran to and fro, harnessing horses to wagons. A pair of litters had been prepared for Catelyn and Robb, but at the last moment, it was decided that Catelyn would remain here after all. Ned had changed his mind, concerned that the journey south would be too harsh for an infant. Robert might be disappointed not to see them, but Ned insisted he'd send for them later if needed. For now, Catelyn and Robb would watch over Winterfell side by side with Lyanna. Ned stood near the gates, dressed in traveling leathers and a thick cloak, Longclaw sheathed at his hip. Benjen was there too, silently helping strap supplies. A handful of knights and men-at-arms would accompany Ned. Lyanna walked among them, checking the final details, her breath visible in the cold air. When she approached Ned, she saw the gravity in his eyes. You'll ride for many days, she said quietly. Be cautious on the roads. I hear talk of bandits plaguing certain stretches near the neck. I will, he answered, glancing around at the preparations. And you, be wary. Not all who smile in Winterfell do so with honest hearts. If any trouble arises, send a raven at once. She inclined her head. Don't worry. Between Luwin, Sir Roderick, and me, we'll keep Winterfell safe. Benjen paused to listen, leaning on a saddlebow. He turned to Lyanna. "If you have need of me, call. I'll remain as well, for now." That comforted Lyanna. She stepped back, folding her arms against the chill. She remembered the day Ned had left for the war with their older brother, Brandon. She had waved them off, an uneasy feeling gnawing her insides. Now, though the realm was technically at peace, she felt a similar twinge. War's ghosts still lingered. She wondered if life would ever be free of that threat. Ned hoisted himself into the saddle, and the men fell in line behind him. He let his gaze sweep over the courtyard, one final time. Lyanna stood near the front with Caitlin close by, Rob swaddled in her arms. Ned dipped his head, as though mentally marking them in place. Then he clicked his tongue, guiding his horse forward. The party filed out, the clop of hooves echoing. The portcullis rumbled, and the travelers disappeared down the winding road beyond Winterfell's walls. For a few moments, a hush draped the courtyard. Then the routine of the day resumed. Guards resumed their posts. Stable boys rushed to chores, and servants bustled about. Caitlin turned to Lyanna with a small sigh. "He'll return," she said softly, more to comfort herself than Lyanna. "Robert's court may be full of intrigues, but Ned is no fool." Lyanna nodded. "He's always been careful. We have our own tasks now." She cast a glance around the courtyard. "I'll be in the Great Hall shortly to hear any pressing issues. Will you join me?" Caitlin tightened her hold on Rob, pressing the baby close. "Yes, once I see him fed, then I'll come." Lyanna laid a gentle hand on Rob's head, feeling the soft auburn fuzz. He gazed back at her with wide, wondering eyes. She felt a pang of longing that nearly undid her composure. With a smile that wavered just slightly, she turned away and strode into the castle corridors, ignoring the twist of her heart. She made for the Great Hall, where she would hold open court for the first time in Ned's absence. Already, a handful of petitioners waited. She could hear the low rumble of conversation from behind the thick doors. Gathering her nerve, she pushed them open. Sunlight streamed in through narrow windows, illuminating a cluster of small folk, 2 traveling merchants, and 1 minor lord from a nearby holdfast. They all turned at her entrance. Lyanna moved to the dais, taking a seat in the large wooden chair that faced the hall. It felt too big for her, the carved direwolf heads at each corner seeming to watch her every move. She let her cloak drape around her shoulders, forcing her posture to remain straight. A hush fell as they stared, curious and uncertain. Sir Roderick stood by, half a pace behind her, arms folded. He caught her eye and gave a subtle nod, as though encouraging her to proceed. Lyanna looked out over the assembled folk. "Come forward," she said, doing her best to imbue her voice with quiet authority. "Speak your names and your concerns, one at a time." There was a moment's hesitation, then a pair of small folk from the outlying farms stepped up, wringing their hands. They spoke of a dispute over a boundary wall, each claiming the rightful use of nearby pasture for their cattle. Lyanna listened carefully, letting them both have their say. She asked questions, gleaning details, then assured them she'd dispatch a sworn man to inspect the boundary. Once the truth was determined, they'd settle it fairly. They departed, bowing awkwardly, looking more reassured than when they'd arrived. Next came the traveling merchants, who complained of bandits harassing trade caravans on the eastern roads. Lyanna inquired about the nature of these outlaws, their numbers, their tactics. She promised to send word to the nearest holdfast to increase patrols. The merchants seemed mollified, though they eyed her with a mix of curiosity and leftover doubt. Still, they left with thanks, bowing in the stiff manner of men unaccustomed to bowing to a woman. Finally, the minor lord took his turn. He was a tall, spare man in worn finery, with an old house sigil embroidered on his cloak. His voice was smooth, polished from years of dealing with nobility. He extended the courtesy of a bow, but the set of his lips suggested caution. "My lady, I come to speak of harvest tariffs. Our farmers have struggled with poor yields since the war, and the taxes demanded by Winterfell weigh heavily on them. I humbly request a temporary reduction." Lyanna considered his words carefully. She glanced at Sir Roderick, who gave no hint of disapproval. She knew that Winterfell needed to store enough for winter, and the realm had a system of taxes to ensure no holdfast hoarded wealth unfairly. But dire circumstances called for mercy at times. "How poor have the harvests been?" she asked. And do you have any reserves left from the past season? He gestured helplessly. Some, but not enough, if the next winter is harsh. My people worry they won't survive with such a burden. Lyanna tapped a finger on the arm of the chair. Very well. I'll consider a temporary reduction of tariffs, but I'll need more specific numbers. Send me an account of your yields, how many bushels remain, and the size of your population. If your claim holds up, we can reduce the tax by a modest fraction until the next harvest. Nay. A flicker of relief crossed his face. Thank you, my lady. She inclined her head. We aim to see no small folks starve. But be warned, if you withhold the truth, or try to exploit this leniency, the punishment will be swift. Understood? He bowed more deeply, acquiescing. Of course. When he left, Lyanna felt a rush of triumph tempered by caution. Holding court was not so different from riding a spirited horse. One needed a firm grip on the reins, but also the agility to adapt. She glanced back at Sir Roderick, who offered a respectful inclination of his head. You did well, he murmured. She let out a slow breath. It's only the beginning, she replied, then stood, stepping down from the dais. The small crowd dispersed, leaving her alone in the vast space. She listened to the crackle of the hearth's dying embers and the echo of footfalls as the last petitioners exited. A day's labor well done. At least for now. Making her way into the corridors, she glanced out a window at the overcast sky. A storm might be brewing in the distance. Dark, gray clouds drifted toward Winterfell. She had the sudden urge to see the old gods again, to let the solemn weirwood reassure her. She followed the familiar path to the godswood, passing under arches damp with condensation, her footsteps echoing. The godswood was hushed as always, the leaves whispering in the breeze. She approached the heart tree, its carved face watching her as though it might speak. She closed her eyes, letting the stillness wrap around her. She remembered doing the same as a girl, when the world felt too large, too full of demands. Even then she had sought solace here, imagining the old gods might listen to her restless spirit. Her mind drifted to Ned, now days away on the road to King's Landing, where Robert waited with an uncertain welcome. She thought of the child she had lost to secrecy, the one who grew somewhere far from her arms. She wondered if he was healthy, if he would ever know her. The pang in her chest grew sharper, but she pressed a hand to her heart as though to keep it contained. She was a Stark, and Starks had their duty. She whispered a soft prayer, forming the words with care. Old gods, watch over the north, over Ned, over the child I cannot claim. Give me strength to keep my vows and protect my people. The wind stirred, rustling the leaves above. It was not an answer, yet it felt like an acknowledgement. A moment later, she heard a faint crunch of footsteps on the moss. Turning, she saw Catelyn approaching, her face subdued. Lyanna offered a small smile, stepping aside so she could join her near the heart tree. Catelyn glanced at the carved face, then at Lyanna. I sometimes miss the Seven, the faith of my birth, she admitted. But I'm learning to find peace here. Lyanna nodded, noticing the tension in the set of Catelyn's mouth. He's gone, she said softly, guessing the cause. Ned. Yes, Catelyn said, her voice almost a whisper. I know he's just left this morning, but I already feel his absence. Lyanna folded her arms, looking at the reflection of blood-red leaves in the pool's dark water. We'll manage, she said, trying to infuse her tone with confidence. Between us, we'll keep Winterfell running smoothly. He'll come back to find everything in order. Nanishat. Catelyn studied her, a touch of gratitude in her gaze. I believe you, she said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the hush of the godswood enfolding them, the ancient tree seeming to listen. At last, Catelyn cleared her throat. I came to tell you that Lord Surin has returned with an update on his harvests. He's asked to speak with you. Lyanna sighed, pushing aside her introspection. Duty called. Then I'll go, she said. Will you join me? Catelyn nodded. Yes, I will. And after, we can discuss how best to manage the next weeks. There's much to do. Now, Twitter. They made their way back toward the castle, leaving the quiet sanctuary behind. Torches flared in the corridors, and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer resonated from the yard. Lyanna squared her shoulders, finding renewed determination in each step. This was her life now. Protecting the North, guiding its people, and proving herself worthy of the name Stark. Days turned into weeks, each one filled with tasks and negotiations. Lyanna worked tirelessly. She oversaw repairs on the outer walls before the true snows arrived, coordinated with the Master of Horse to ensure that the stables were stocked with enough fodder, and met with lords who trickled in from outlying areas to see how the She-Wolf of Winterfell managed in Ned's absence. Some came to test her, challenging her decisions with thinly veiled skepticism. She confronted them calmly, employing logic and unwavering confidence. Though not all left fully satisfied, word spread that Lyanna Stark was no timid placeholder. She was forging a reputation, day by day. Catelyn and Lyanna found a tentative camaraderie. They shared meals, discussing how best to handle the household's daily details. Sometimes they took Robb for a stroll around the battlements, letting him giggle at the cawing ravens. In those moments, Lyanna felt a bittersweet yearning, but she channeled it into affection for her nephew. He was, after all, a child of House Stark, and she wanted him to grow surrounded by strength and unity. On one such afternoon, as they stood overlooking the training yard, Robb babbling contentedly in Catelyn's arms, Lyanna glimpsed Benjen sparring with a young guard. The ring of steel on steel reached them across the yard. Benjen had skill, but there was a restlessness in his movements that betrayed a deeper unease. Lyanna wondered if he still contemplated joining the Night's Watch. He had mentioned it before. She prayed he would find peace, whether that meant staying here or traveling north to the Wall. The wind brought a chill, and a swirl of dead leaves tumbled across the yard. Catelyn tucked Robb's blanket closer, and Lyanna felt the prickle of the cold against her skin. The seasons were shifting again, edging toward the sharper claws of autumn. She thought of Ned on the road, or perhaps already in King's Landing, dealing with the complexities of court. She hoped Robert would not press him too hard about her survival, or the truth behind the war. Trusting that Ned would guard their secret, she focused on fulfilling her role here. That evening, she sat in her solar, poring over a map of the North by candlelight. She traced the route from Winterfell to the Wall, noting all the villages and holdfasts in between. The flicker of the candle cast her shadow on the stones. Time slipped by, and she barely noticed her growing fatigue. Only when her vision blurred did she realize she needed rest. She rose, pinched out the candle, and was about to retire when a sudden knock sounded on the door. Surprised, she called for them to enter. A guard stepped in, helmet tucked under one arm. "My lady, forgive the intrusion. There's a raven from King's Landing." Her heart lurched. "Has Maester Lewin read the message?" The guard nodded. "He has, my lady, but he said you should see it at once." Lyanna grabbed her cloak, hurrying past the guard into the corridor. Anxiety gnawed at her. What might have happened? Was Ned injured, or had Robert discovered some dangerous tidbit of truth? She hurried up the steps two at a time, ignoring the burning in her thighs. Lewin was in the rookery, already holding the parchment in one hand. He looked up as she entered, face lined with worry. "My lady," he murmured, passing the parchment over. She noticed the royal seal of the stag and crown. Hastily she broke it and unfolded the letter, scanning the lines. Her stomach clenched at the words, though the message itself was brief. Ned had arrived safely in King's Landing, but tensions were high. Robert expected Ned to remain for a time, to advise on matters of governance. Rumor had reached court that Lyanna Stark was alive, and some of Robert's courtiers pressed for answers. Ned wrote in careful phrases, warning her that she might soon receive questions or even visitors from the crown inquiring into her status. He urged her to remain steadfast, reassure the North that this was all in hand, and trust him to handle Robert's temper. Lyanna read the letter twice, feeling relief that Ned was unhurt, but also a rising dread. The news of her survival would stir old resentments, old heartbreaks. She was, in many ways, the catalyst for the rebellion in Robert's mind. If he found out she had borne a child, if he somehow pieced together secrets best left buried. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. When she opened them, she saw Lewin watching her with concern. She refolded the letter and slipped it inside her cloak. "Thank you, Maester," she said, her voice tight but composed. "I'll craft a reply in the morning." He inclined his head, sympathy in his eyes. "We can only wait for more news, my lady." She lingered for a moment, letting the raven perched nearby bob its head at her. Then she left the rookery, retreading the steps down to her solar. She felt the weight of the north stone walls pressing in, the hush of a near-silent castle at night. Taking a seat at her desk, she laid the letter before her, smoothing the parchment. As the candlelight flickered, she stared at Ned's careful words, reading between the lines for any hidden urgency. He was cautioning her. Robert's curiosity was dangerous. The slightest slip could unravel all they had sacrificed to keep the child safe. Yet she drew in a breath and remembered her vow. She would not cower. Nor would she let old ghosts disrupt her duty to the north. Let Robert send his questions, or even an envoy. She would stand firm. The north was her home, and she intended to guard it with every bit of strength she possessed. If a challenge came, she would answer as a wolf answers an intruder in its territory. Calmly, but with an unyielding edge, she sat there long into the night, quill in hand, drafting her response. She chose her words with caution, offering polite greetings and reassurances that Winterfell thrived, that the north was at peace, that Ned's domain was secure. Not a single phrase gave any hint of deeper secrets. When at last she finished, she melted the wax and pressed the direwolf seal. By then, her candle was nearly spent, the pool of wax widening across the holder. Exhausted, she slumped back in the chair, staring at the letter that would go out at first light. The gods alone knew what might come from King's Landing in the days ahead. But if war had taught her anything, it was to face each trial with courage. She rose, leaving the letter on the desk to be delivered come morning. She slipped out of the solar and walked the corridors, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, and she thought again of the motto carved into her very soul: "Winter is coming." For now, she would gather her strength. She would continue her duties, see to her people, and prepare for any storms that might sweep up from the south. No matter what was said in King's Landing, no matter what suspicions or accusations might arise, Lyanna Stark would not be undone. She was the she-wolf of the north, returned from the brink of death to protect her pack. The night's chill crept under her cloak, but she kept walking, each step a silent pledge that she would endure whatever came next, firm as the ancient stones beneath her feet. Lyanna rose before first light, tugged from uneasy dreams by a deep sense of foreboding that knotted in her belly. She dressed quickly in a plain woolen gown, pulling on sturdy boots rather than the more delicate slippers that some ladies favored within the castle. Her breath rose in pale clouds before her face as she stepped into the corridor, the chill of the early hour wrapping around her like a shroud. She did not call for servants. She needed solitude to gather her thoughts, to brace herself for the day. The letter from Ned remained in her solar, locked in a small wooden chest along with other documents she guarded carefully. His words had been just vague enough to offer no comfort, only caution. Her feet carried her down the corridor and through a side doorway that led into the yard. A sharp wind tugged at her cloak, and she felt her face stiffen under its cold bite. Overhead, a few faint stars lingered, and the horizon glimmered with hints of dawn. Torches guttered along the walls, their light flickering across the stone. She passed a sentry who dipped his head in a silent greeting. She nodded back, eyes focused beyond him. Winterfell's courtyard, so familiar from her youth, felt different now. She stood at the castle's center as a figure of authority, aware that each choice she made would ripple across the north. A low growl reached her ears. She turned to see one of the castle hounds padding across the courtyard. The dog sniffed at her cloak, tail wagging tentatively. Lyanna knelt, letting her gloved hand run through its thick fur, and the warmth of the beast's body eased her tension for a moment. She murmured a quiet greeting, then rose, her mind returning to more pressing matters. She thought of the letter from King's Landing and the rumors swirling at court. If Robert's curiosity was piqued, if courtiers whispered that Lyanna Stark was indeed alive, whispers too loud for him to ignore. She feared that soon enough, some envoy or official would arrive to pry into the circumstances of her survival. And if that happened, she would have to step with care across a field mined by lies. She turned toward the stables, deciding a ride might clear her head before the day's duties called. The stable boys were accustomed to her early visits now. One of them, a wiry lad named Domric, hurried over as soon as he saw her enter. He bobbed his head and said, "Good morning, my lady. Shall I saddle the bay mare you favor?" Lyanna nodded. "Yes, please." She paused, scanning the rows of stalls. Her favorite mare, the dark bay with a white star on its forehead, nickered softly in recognition. Though the wind outside was sharp, she still preferred an open-air ride to pacing around the corridors of the keep, stewing on anxieties she could not yet address. When Domric brought the mare forward, she slipped her boot into the stirrup and hoisted herself into the saddle, exhaling a cloud of breath as she settled. The stable boy handed her the reins, offered a respectful bow, and stepped back. Urging the horse into a walk, she guided it out into the yard. The sentries at the gate recognized her at once, hoisting the portcullis without question. They knew she often took these early morning rides, and by now, the novelty of her presence had settled into a wary but accepted routine. She nodded her thanks as she passed beneath the iron teeth. Once beyond, she gave the mare a little squeeze, and they trotted down the snow-packed road that led away from Winterfell's walls. Dark silhouettes of pine spruce flanked the road, their branches swaying in the wind. The sky gradually lightened, streaks of pale gray overtaking the final pinpricks of starlight. She let the mare pick its pace, the sound of hooves steady against the frozen ground. In the quiet, her thoughts turned inward. She had grown more comfortable presiding over disputes and managing the day-to-day running of the castle. But she knew a real test would come if the realm's official eyes turned upon her too sharply. And if that day arrived, she needed to be more than just confident in Winterfell's halls. She needed her bannerman to stand by her, unwavering. Farther down the road, she reached a small clearing. She let the mare slow, then dismounted. Tying the reins loosely around a low-hanging branch, she walked a few steps across the snow, the crunch beneath her boots sounding loud in the hush. She gazed out at the sweep of frosted plains, extending into the distance. A realm that her father had once taught her to regard with reverence and duty. She ran her palm over the short, rough bark of a winter-gnarled tree and closed her eyes. The north, vast and harsh, was hers to protect in Ned's absence. A bird cried overhead. A hawk, or perhaps a raven, and she opened her eyes to watch it circle. She thought of the secret child she had entrusted to Ned's promise. Hidden away, a wave of longing stole her breath. She wondered what he looked like now, if he was thriving, if he had his father's dark hair, or her own features. She pushed the thought away, though it lingered like a bruise on her heart. Duty first, she reminded herself. Always duty first. She remounted and turned back. The sky continued to lighten, gray shifting to a washed-out blue. By the time she returned to Winterfell, more activity filled the courtyard. Servants hurried with crates of supplies. Guards changed shifts, their breath misting in the air. She headed to the stables, handed the reins to Domric once more, and patted the mare's flank in gratitude. Then she stepped back inside the castle walls to face the day. When she arrived in the great hall, she saw Sir Roderick and Maester Luwin already waiting, conferring quietly near the dais. A few other household retainers were present, along with a small group of men who wore the sigils of House Serwyn and House Manderley. They stood in a loose cluster, eyes turning toward her as she entered. Lyanna felt the weight of their gazes but met them calmly. She took her seat at the head of the hall, a place that once would have felt too big and too grand for her. Now it felt simply like a seat where decisions were made. The fire in the hearth cast a warm glow across the flagstones, warring against the chill that drifted through the high windows. Sir Roderick approached. "My lady," he said in that gravelly tone of his, "House Serwyn's envoy has come regarding the repairs on their holdfast walls. Lord Serwyn requests Winterfell's assistance. With winter coming, he says they need sturdy defenses." Lyanna nodded. "We'll hear them," she said, and gave Sir Roderick a signal to bring the envoys forward. She listened carefully as the Serwyn men outlined their concerns. The holdfast had been damaged in raids near the end of the war. They lacked skilled masons to finish rebuilding before the snows arrived in earnest. They asked Winterfell to send laborers and materials, promising to repay with a portion of their harvest come spring. Lyanna weighed the request. Serwyn lands lay close enough to Winterfell that a breach in their defenses might invite outlaws to spread across the region, which would be a larger problem for everyone. She asked a few clarifying questions, gleaning how many men Serwyn could spare to assist, and how quickly they could transport stone and timber from a quarry. The older envoy, a stooped man with weathered features, answered politely. She glanced to Sir Roderick, who gave a near imperceptible nod of support. Finally, Lyanna decided. Winterfell will send a contingent of masons and carpenters, she said. You must provide wagons and handle the quarrying of stone yourselves. In return, once the walls are rebuilt, will require the restationing of at least 20 Serwyn men-at-arms to patrol the roads leading to Winterfell. Our safety is shared. One of the younger envoys looked taken aback. My lady, that's a sizable demand. 20 men? Lyanna held his gaze with firm resolve. It is no greater sacrifice than sending our skilled laborers and materials. The war took a toll on all our houses. If we shore up your defenses, we expect your aid in keeping the surrounding roads safe. If you find that request untenable, then we can renegotiate. But our stonemasons will stay here in the meantime. No. She let silence fill the hall. The older envoy exchanged glances with the younger, and at last, the man gave a respectful bow. Very well, he said. We accept. When will the masons set out? Lyanna glanced at Sir Roderick, who cleared his throat. Within a fortnight, if the weather holds. Thank you, my lady, the envoy said, dipping his head again. House Serwyn is in your debt. They backed away, and Lyanna nodded to Sir Roderick, who led them from the dais to finalize details. She noted that the envoy shot curious glances at her, as though re-evaluating the woman they'd heard so many rumors about. She wondered if they still clung to the stories of how Lyanna had once been wild and willful, or if they realized she had changed, tempered like steel in the forges of heartbreak. Next came a representative from White Harbor. An older man wearing the sigil of House Manderley on his surcoat. He was plump-faced, with thinning hair and a polite bow. He spoke of trade routes and the possibility of new shipments coming from the south. Grain, fish, textiles. White Harbor wanted to ensure safe passage along the King's Road, requiring Winterfell's collaboration. Lyanna listened, gave measured replies. For the second time that morning, she found herself agreeing to send some men-at-arms to patrol certain vulnerable stretches of road. In the back of her mind, she tallied the number of forces she was committing, making sure she did not overextend Winterfell's capabilities. When she tentatively agreed, the Manderley representative seemed pleased. She glanced around at the watchers in the hall, noticing the mix of acceptance and lingering skepticism. So many pairs of eyes, each bearing a judgment about whether Lyanna Stark could stand in Ned's place. Some looked almost relieved to see she was capable of negotiation and fair dealing. Others kept a neutral facade, offering polite nods. She supposed that was the best she could hope for at this stage. When the Manderley men finished, she rose, concluding the morning's session. The small group dispersed, returning to their errands and duties throughout the castle. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Maester Luvine approached, carrying a small stack of parchments. We have messages from Lord Glover and Lady Mormont, he said. Reports on their progress with your earlier agreements. Lyanna accepted them. Thank you, Maester. She glanced over the top pages, pleased to see that Glover's newly claimed lands near the Wolfswood were taking shape, with a small outpost for logging and a modest palisade in progress. Lady Mormont wrote with her usual candor, stating that she'd root out any outlaws in her territory, reminding Lyanna that Bear Island did not suffer intruders lightly. Lyanna suppressed a smile. Lady Mormont's bluntness was oddly reassuring. Set these on my desk, she told Lewin. I'll answer them this afternoon. He nodded, heading off with the parchments clutched to his chest. Lyanna stepped out of the great hall, hooking her thumbs into her belt as she walked. She felt the satisfying ache of a morning's worth of negotiation and decision-making. Part of her marveled at how much she had grown into this role. In her younger days, she'd been content to follow her whims, to ride and laugh and defy expectations. Now she carried a sense of duty that guided her every word. She missed the carefree girl she'd once been, but she suspected that girl could no longer survive in the world that had shaped her into this. A familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Benjen jogging toward her, breath misting in the cold corridor. "Lya," he said, using the childhood nickname he hadn't spoken in ages. "Do you have a moment?" She nodded. "Of course. Walk with me." They made their way up a set of winding stairs that led to a small gallery overlooking the courtyard. She glanced at his face, noticing how tension drew lines at the corners of his mouth. He was silent until they reached the gallery railing. Below, the bustle of Winterfell continued. Men hauling crates, a blacksmith pounding away at some piece of metal, stable boys darting in every direction. The clang of steel, the whinny of horses, the distant chatter of voices drifted upward. At last, Benjen leaned against the railing, gazing down. "I've been thinking again about the Night's Watch," he said quietly. "About traveling to the Wall." Lyanna studied him, recalling the restlessness that she'd often seen in his eyes. "You don't have to decide that now," she said gently. "Ned will want you here, and so do I. The North can use your help." He let out a soft breath. "I know. But with Ned away, I've had more time to think about my purpose. The war took Brandon and Father. You nearly died, but the gods spared you. I feel unmoored, Lya. I've no taste for petty politics or for staying idle as a spare son. The Watch needs good men, especially now with so many desertions." Lynette Noir. She could see the turmoil in him. "Benjen," she said softly, "I don't doubt your commitment or your wish to serve. But the Wall is far and the life of the Night's Watch is harsh. You'd be giving up any claim to titles, lands, even a family." His gaze flicked to her. "Is that so different from what I already have? Winterfell belongs to Ned, and now, in his absence, to you. I'm the youngest son, and I can do more good as a sworn brother of the Watch than as an extra sword in Winterfell's yard." Lyanna felt a pang. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "That might be true," she admitted. "But I don't want you to make a rash choice. At least wait until Ned returns. Let him speak with you properly." He covered her hand with his own, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I will wait," he said, "but my mind is near settled." Then he mustered a small smile. "Though I'll do my duty in the meantime. If you need me to escort any envoys or quell a bandit raid, I'll do it." She returned his smile, albeit sadly. "You're a good brother," she murmured. "Winterfell is stronger with you here." He dipped his head in acknowledgement, then turned his gaze back to the courtyard. The wind rustled the edges of their cloaks, and for a moment, they stood there in a companionable silence, each lost in thought. Lyanna found herself wishing she could promise him a more meaningful place at her side, but she knew the call of the Watch was not a simple whim. If he truly felt compelled to go north, she had no right to chain him here. Eventually, she excused herself, explaining that she had letters to write and tasks to oversee. Benjen gave her one last searching look, then nodded, turning away. Lyanna made her way down the steps, passing through a drafty corridor lined with old tapestries. One tapestry showed a scene of the first men battling the others in the long night, the white silhouettes of the others looming over a field of fallen soldiers. She paused to stare at it, feeling a distant shiver. So many legends said the wall was the only thing that kept such terrors at bay. Perhaps Benjen's calling was not so misguided after all. She returned to her solar. A fire crackled in the hearth, and Maester Luwin had left the parchments on her desk as promised. She sank into the wooden chair, unfolding Lady Mormont's letter. Reading the blunt words in that spare, bold script made her smile. Lady Mormont wrote that she had encountered a small band of would-be raiders on the northern coast of Bear Island, but we turned them back into the sea like the scum they were. Lyanna penned a brief reply, commending the lady for her vigilance and reaffirming Winterfell's commitment to help if needed. Then she moved on to Glover's letter, to which she replied with measured praise, and a note that she hoped to visit the new outpost in person once the roads were safe enough. She was nearly done sealing her replies with the direwolf sigil when another knock came at her door. This time it was a guard in stark livery, helm tucked under his arm. "My lady," he said, clearing his throat nervously, "a rider has arrived from the south. He bears the royal sigil and requests an audience with the Lady of Winterfell." Her heart jolted. So soon? She set aside her quill, rose from the chair, and carefully placed the letters on the desk. "Show him to the Great Hall," she said. "I'll be there shortly." The guard bowed and hurried away. Lyanna took a moment to steady herself, smoothing her hair and cloak, reminding herself that she was no trembling girl. She was the acting head of House Stark. If this rider came with questions from Robert, she would answer them calmly, revealing nothing that could jeopardize her child or her family. With a final breath, she left the solar and headed for the Great Hall. The doors stood ajar, letting in a swirl of cold air. Inside, she saw the figure of a man in traveling leathers, the crowned stag of House Baratheon embroidered on his surcoat. He was tall and lean, with a hawkish nose and gray at his temples. A few of Winterfell's guards stood by, watchful. As Lyanna approached, the man bowed low enough to be considered polite, though not overly deferential. She motioned for him to straighten. She took a seat on the simple wooden chair near the hearth, rather than the larger lord's seat. Something about this felt more personal, more direct. "Welcome to Winterfell," she said, letting her voice carry an edge of cool courtesy. "What business brings you north with the royal sigil?" He introduced himself as Sir Harbert of the king's retinue. His voice was smooth, refined, with that slight southern lilt Lyanna recognized from her time near King's Landing. "My Lady Stark," he said, carefully addressing her by name. "I come on behalf of King Robert Baratheon. He sends his regards and wishes you well." A faint smile touched his lips, as though these were merely pleasantries. "His Grace has heard that you live and reside here as a leading figure in Lord Eddard's absence." Lyanna inclined her head. "I do. Lord Eddard is my brother. He traveled to King's Landing at the king's summons, leaving me to oversee Winterfell." Sir Harbert offered a slight bow again. "Of course, my lady. The king wonders at the circumstances of your survival, given the rumors that once spread far and wide about your demise. He has charged me with inquiring into your well-being, ensuring that there is no confusion or falsehood at play." She kept her face neutral, though her pulse fluttered. "I can assure you, Sir Harbert, there is no falsehood. The war's end found me gravely ill. My brother feared I would not survive, so he kept my condition private. When my health returned, a rumor of my death had already gained a foothold. In time, Lord Eddard thought it best not to stir the realm with conflicting tales. Now that we are at peace, I've chosen to claim my rightful place among my family." Her explanation, rehearsed many times in her mind, came out smoothly. The knight studied her face, perhaps seeking cracks in her story. "I see," he said. "His Grace will be relieved to know you're well. However, he does wonder, where were you kept during the war? Rumors speak of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen spiriting you away. Some say you were held against your will. Others claim, well, the rumors vary." She kept her expression carefully schooled. "Rumors often do. The truth is that I was confined, yes, and not by my own choosing. The war made swift rescue difficult. Lord Eddard arrived late, but he managed to retrieve me. I prefer not to dwell on the specifics. The Targaryen line is ended, and reopening those wounds serves no one." "None?" He bowed his head in seeming sympathy. "Of course, my lady. I do not mean to upset you. However, the king, knowing how the war began in part due to your abduction, wishes to ensure there is no hidden threat. No Targaryen loyalists. No undisclosed heirs." Down. She felt a cold sweat threaten to break across her skin, but she remained outwardly composed. "There are no Targaryens here, Sir Harbert," she said, her tone low and firm. "No heirs, hidden or otherwise. The North follows King Robert." He nodded slowly. "I'm relieved to hear it. The king also inquired after your well-being in a more personal sense. He once was close to you, or so the realm believed, before the rebellion, that is." She tensed, remembering the betrothal that had spurred Robert into a furious quest to reclaim her. "King Robert and I had an arrangement," she said. But war changes many things. I bear him no ill will, yet I have no desire to revisit that past. I hope his grace understands." Sir Harbert's eyes flickered with curiosity. "I shall convey your words faithfully, my lady." She gave a curt dip of her head. "Thank you. Now, if that concludes your mission, I assume you'll want rest and refreshment. You've traveled far. Winterfell is not close to King's Landing." He allowed a small smile. "I appreciate your hospitality, but the king asked me to return swiftly with a full report. Might I remain in Winterfell just one night, observe the workings of the castle, and depart at first light?" Lyanna. Her suspicion flared, though she forced herself to be gracious. "Of course. You are welcome as a guest. We have no secrets, Sir Harbert." "Thank you, my lady." He bowed. "If you need anything further from me, I'm at your disposal." She rose, concluding the audience. "One of our men will guide you to your quarters. I wish you a pleasant evening." Sir Harbert bowed again, then followed a guard out of the hall. Lyanna let out a long breath, fighting the urge to pace. She turned to see Sir Roderick lingering in the shadows, his brows drawn. She went to him, her cloak swirling around her feet. "He's here to sniff out contradictions," she said quietly. Roderick nodded. "So it seems." Lyanna's gaze flicked to the door through which Sir Harbert had left. "We must keep our wits about us. He'll watch everything. How people address me, what stories they tell, any sign of wrongdoing. If Robert suspects more than we can explain, the consequences could be dire." Roderick's whiskers twitched. "We'll instruct the household to be polite, but reserved. Let no one give away details that might stir the pot." "That's..." Lyanna pressed her lips together, nodding. "Yes, and ensure the men keep an eye on him. He might probe the servants for gossip." Roderick bowed, stepping away. Lyanna lingered in the hall, staring at the embers in the hearth. When she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's face from years ago. Young, brash, so sure of his claim on her. Now, he sat the Iron Throne, and though the war was done, old wounds festered. She had to tread carefully. The secret of her son would remain locked in her heart. She would never let Robert's paranoia or bitterness endanger the boy. If that meant weaving half-truths, she would do so 1,000 times over. She left the hall, deciding to check on Catelyn and Robb. If Sir Harbert pried around, he might also question the Lady of Winterfell. Lyanna wanted to ensure their stories were aligned. She found Catelyn in her solar, seated by a crackling fireplace, Robb on her lap. He was a lively child, babbling and tugging at the end of Catelyn's sleeve. The lady looked up at Lyanna's entrance, reading the tension on her face. "Is something amiss?" Catelyn asked, adjusting Robb so he wouldn't slide off her lap. Lyanna closed the door behind her and came to stand near the fire. "A royal messenger arrived," she said, voice hushed. "Sent by Robert. He's here to confirm I'm truly alive and that there are no hidden Targaryens lurking about." Catelyn raised a brow. "Does he suspect anything, Ab? The child?" Lyanna felt her throat tighten. Ned's letter hinted that rumors of my survival had reached the king. If Robert suspected a Targaryen heir, that would be catastrophic. But so far, this envoy only asks about me, Rhaegar, and the manner of my captivity. She ran a hand through her hair, unsettled. "I've given him the story we prepared, that I was rescued, nearly died, and convalesced away from prying eyes. But he wants to stay the night, observe the castle." "I'm sure he'll speak to you." Catelyn frowned, adjusting Robb's blanket. "He'll find nothing. Our story is consistent, and no one here, aside from a very few, suspects the truth of your child." Robb, apparently bored with the tension, reached up with a chubby hand to grab at Lyanna's cloak. She gently let his fingers wrap around hers, offering him a soft smile despite the heaviness in her chest. He babbled something incomprehensible but cheerful, and for a heartbeat, her worries eased. She thought of the child she'd nursed for so brief a time, of what it felt like to cradle that tiny life. Robb's presence was both a comfort and a reminder of all she had lost. Catelyn must have seen the conflict in her eyes, for she cleared her throat and rose, settling Robb against her hip. "We'll be strong," she said quietly, "no matter what questions he asks." Lyanna nodded. "Yes. Keep your answers simple. We mustn't contradict each other." State only that I was deathly ill, that rumors of my death spread, that Ned chose not to correct them until I recovered." She tried to smile, though it felt forced on her lips. "Thank you, Caitlin, for standing with me." A flicker of emotion crossed Caitlin's eyes. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps something more complex. But she nodded. "We are both Starks now, in our own way." Lyanna dipped her head, acknowledging that bond, fragile though it might be. Then she excused herself. She needed to ensure that servants and stewards throughout the castle kept a united front. Any slip of the tongue could invite deeper scrutiny. She spent the remainder of the afternoon quietly instructing key staff to mind their words if the envoy from King's Landing questioned them. She did not reveal all the reasons behind her caution, only that he sought unnecessary rumors, and it was best to speak only the facts about her illness and recovery. Evening fell, the sky shading to a dark gray that threatened snow. In the great hall, a modest feast was laid out in the envoy's honor. Sir Harbert arrived in fresh clothing. Evidently, he had more than one set of traveling clothes, and offered flattering remarks about Winterfell's hospitality. Lyanna tried to engage him with polite conversation about the roads, the weather, any topic that would deflect prying about her past. He was courteous, but she saw the calculation in his eyes. The other lords present, mostly a handful of minor northern bannermen, ate in near silence, occasionally sneaking curious glances at the southern night. Caitlin sat at Lyanna's side, with Robb left in the care of a nurse for the evening. Benjen attended as well, watchful from across the table. As the meal progressed, Sir Harbert asked questions about the scarcities of the northern harvest, the condition of the roads, the bannermen's loyalty. Lyanna answered matter-of-factly, painting a picture of a realm at peace, loyal to King Robert. Yet she knew he was storing each detail away, searching for contradictions or weaknesses. When the platters were cleared and only cups of mulled wine remained, he addressed her directly. "My lady, it's impressive to see how thoroughly you manage Winterfell," he remarked, swirling his wine. "One would think you were raised for such responsibilities." She didn't flinch. "I was raised a Stark, and the Starks have governed the North for generations. I only follow my father's and brother's examples." He smiled, a thin curve of the lips. "I see. And how fortunate that you returned to us after your presumed death. Fate can be strange." His words held a subtle edge, as if inviting her to elaborate. She simply inclined her head. Fate indeed. At length, Sir Harbert feigned a yawn, though she suspected it was more deliberate than genuine. "If you'll excuse me, my lady, I've traveled long and would take my rest. I thank you for your hospitality." Lyanna stood and offered a polite nod. "Sleep well," she said, "and safe travels on the morrow." He departed, escorted by 2 guards toward his chambers. The hall relaxed once he was gone, the tension diffusing. Lyanna could almost hear the collective exhale of the bannermen. She dismissed them, and most drifted away, murmuring among themselves. Only Benjen lingered, moving to her side. He spoke softly so the servants wouldn't overhear. "He's no fool, that one. I don't think he believes our story blindly, but he has no evidence to contradict it." "Oh?" Lyanna's jaw clenched. "We'll maintain our account. By tomorrow, he'll ride back to King's Landing with a bland report. Let him think we're simply too dull for intrigue." Benjen pressed a hand lightly to her shoulder. "Keep your guard up. Spies can be cunning. I'll have a watch posted near his quarters." She nodded, appreciating his caution. She returned to her solar that evening, but found little comfort in its cozy hearth or the thick rugs beneath her feet. She paced in front of the fire, her thoughts racing. The slightest slip could unravel them all. If the king decided to come north in person, if he demanded an oath from her lips, how would she face him? She pictured Robert's face, square-jawed, eyes fierce, the power of the realm at his command. Even if he was more complacent now, she could not forget his burning fury when he believed Rhaegar had taken her. That fury, turned upon the truth of her child, would be unstoppable. After a long while, she forced herself to sit, to breathe, to gather her composure. She would not let fear master her. She was a Stark, and if she had learned anything, it was to endure. Even if the storms raged, she would stand. Eventually, her legs ached. her mind fogged with exhaustion. She drifted into restless sleep in a chair by the fire, never bothering to seek her bed. At dawn, she awoke stiff-necked, the fire burned down to embers. She rose, stretching her muscles, and quickly made herself presentable. Today Sir Harbert would depart, and she needed to see him off. She left the solar, instructing a servant to fetch hot water for her wash basin, then hurried to the courtyard. Outside, the sky was a pearly gray, the air so cold it stung. Sir Harbert stood with his horse, buckling a strap on his saddle. 2 stark guards loitered nearby, discreetly watchful. As soon as Lyanna approached, he turned and offered a slight bow. "My lady, thank you again for your hospitality." She dipped her head. "The roads can be treacherous. Travel safely." He nodded, placing a foot in the stirrup. Then he paused, turning to look at her, his expression carefully unreadable. "King Robert values truth above all," he said. "I trust that I'll have only truth to report." Lyanna's blood chilled. She forced a gracious smile. "The truth of things is often less dramatic than rumor," she said. "I hope His Grace is satisfied with your account." He offered her a cool smile in return. "Farewell, my lady." Swinging astride his mount, he snapped the reins, and the horse trotted to the gate. Lyanna watched him go, posture rigid, until he disappeared beyond Winterfell's walls. The guards relaxed, returning to their posts. She stood there a moment longer, exhaling a long breath that clouded in the cold morning light. If fortune favored her, that would be the last of Robert's inquiries for a while. If not, the thought trailed away, leaving a thread of dread in its wake. Turning, she crossed the courtyard. A group of soldiers sparred in the training yard to her left. The clash of steel on steel was oddly soothing in its routine. She thought about how all of her father's teachings, all of Ned's quiet lessons, had prepared her for these tests. Keeping secrets, managing lords, forging alliances, and showing no weakness. She moved past the yard, heading inside to see to the day's tasks, reminding herself that she was not alone. She had Caitlin, Benjen, Sir Roderick, Maester Luwin, and a host of loyal men who served House Stark. As the day stretched on, messages arrived from the outlying lands. Some were good, brigand raids diminishing in areas where the Northern Knights had increased patrols. Others were worrisome, reports of tensions with certain free folk who had crossed the Gift. Lyanna wrote instructions, prepared to negotiate if they sought peaceful settlement. Each matter demanded her attention, leaving little time to dwell on the envoy's probing questions or the uncertain tidings from King's Landing. She allowed herself to be consumed by the responsibilities of governance, welcoming the distraction. Late in the afternoon, she took a solitary walk through the Godswood. The air under the canopy was cooler, hushed, with the silence broken only by the trickling of water in the black pool. The old weirwood towered at the heart, its carved face gazing eternally upon the reflection of red leaves. Lyanna approached the tree, laying a hand against its pale trunk. She let her eyes drift shut, whispering a prayer as she had done so often these past months. "I ask for strength," she murmured. "Strength to protect this family, to protect the North, to keep hidden what must remain hidden. Let Ned return safe, and let Robert's wrath stay far from these walls." The ancient bark was cold beneath her palm, yet she felt an odd comfort in the presence of a living thing that had witnessed centuries of human striving. She wondered if the old gods listened, if they remembered her father's face, her brother's voices, the laughter of her youth. She breathed in the pine-scented air, letting it fill her lungs, steadying her heartbeat. When she reopened her eyes, she found she wasn't alone. Benjen stood near the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, head slightly bowed. He must have followed her at a distance. She withdrew her hand from the weirwood, turning to him. "You're quiet today," she noted softly. He walked closer, stepping around the tree roots. "I wanted to be sure you were well." She forced a slight smile. "I am tired, but I'll survive." He studied her face, dark eyes full of concern. "That envoy's presence weighed on you." "It did," she admitted. "But he's gone now. Let's hope his report to Robert is dull enough that the king loses interest." Benjen nodded. "We can only hope." He hesitated, then lowered his gaze. Leia, you're carrying too much alone. Sometimes I think you need to confide in someone, unburden yourself. She stiffened, a reflex born of secrets. I can't. It's safer if as few people as possible know the truth. Dentasi. He exhaled. Ned's letter said he'd do what he could to shield you from Robert. But if Robert decides to come north in person, she shook her head sharply, feeling a spike of fear. We'll deal with that if it happens. For now, I won't let the possibility paralyze me. She forced a steadier tone. If you leave for the wall, I'll still manage. But I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't miss you. Benjen's face softened. He reached out, squeezing her shoulder gently. I'm here until Ned returns. We stand as a pack, remember? Indaru. She recalled her father's words from so long ago. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. She nodded, letting herself lean into his touch for a moment. We stand as a pack, she echoed. Then she straightened, pushing aside the swirl of emotion. Come, I have letters to finish, and I need to check on the new patrol rosters. They left the Godswood together, each step guided by necessity rather than desire. The day wore on into evening, and the next dawn brought fresh tasks. More messages from the outlying holdfasts, more minor disputes among small folk. Lyanna tackled them one by one, forging order where chaos might otherwise grow. She sent a raven to Lady Mormont, asking for her to keep watch for any suspicious travelers that might attempt to sail around the northern coasts. Another raven went to Lord Manderley, seeking an update on the roads near White Harbor. In the quieter hours, she found herself staring at the tapestry of the long night again, thinking about the darkness that once covered the world. She imagined the terror of ancient days when the sun vanished and the dead walked. Compared to that, Robert's suspicions and the illusions she guarded seemed almost small, yet they were monumental in her personal realm. History was filled with dire threats, others beyond the wall, dragons from Valyria, but sometimes a single lie in a southern court could spark a war. As the weeks rolled onward, Sir Harbert did not return. No new envoys arrived bearing Robert's banner. Lyanna prayed that he was content with the carefully woven narrative she and Ned had spun. She maintained a constant watch, nonetheless, fully aware that quiet times could simply be the calm before a gathering storm. Finally, a raven from Ned arrived, marked with haste. She read it in her solar with trembling fingers. He was well, though the capital buzzed with intrigues. Robert seemed more engrossed in feasts and tournaments than in dredging up old grievances. Ned assured her that he'd done all he could to placate the king, repeating the story that she had been on the brink of death and hidden away. Yet tension still simmered at court, and Ned would be forced to remain longer than he wished. Lyanna felt both relief and unease. If Robert was distracted, that was good. Yet King's Landing was a nest of vipers, and Ned's sense of honor might lead him into conflict with the schemers who surrounded the throne. The next day dawned crisp and bright, the sky a sharp winter blue. Lyanna took that as a good omen. She donned a heavy cloak and made her way to the courtyard, hoping to inspect the final group of masons and carpenters bound for Serwyn lands. The men were gathered near a line of wagons loaded with timber and tools. As she spoke with their foreman, confirming the route and the supplies, she noticed some of the castle's younger guards slipping anxious glances her way, as if still uncertain how to address her. She addressed them firmly but kindly, reminding them of the importance of the task. By now, the older, more seasoned soldiers treated her with a respect that bordered on deference. She sensed the younger ones would come around in time. When the small caravan rumbled out of Winterfell, heading south along the road, Lyanna stood at the gates and watched it vanish over a small rise. A stiff breeze tugged strands of hair free from her braid, and she absently brushed them aside. She felt a glimmer of satisfaction in seeing the north rebuilt, piece by piece. Under her guidance, repairs were being made, roads patrolled, outposts reinforced. Each act strengthened the realm Ned would return to. And if that realm continued to accept her as a leader, perhaps it would open the door to a future she never dared imagine, a woman who might stand as Warden of the North in her own right. But that dream still felt distant. For now her duty was a caretaker's role. She would watch over Winterfell until Ned came home, guard their secrets with a wolf's tenacity, and ensure that no southern meddling endangered the family's fragile peace. She turned back into the courtyard, footsteps echoing against the stones, resolve steady. She remembered her father's words as if he spoke them now. A Stark must always protect the North, through long nights and bright days, through heartbreak and triumph. And so she would. For she was Lyanna Stark, a living testament to resilience, determined to carry the North forward, no matter the storms that gathered beyond these walls.